Good afternoon, everybody. Now, the purpose of the meeting today is for the Joint Committee to discuss Ireland's national aviation policy and to receive an update on security arrangements and passenger services at Dublin Airport. And we're now joined today by the new Chief Executive of the Dublin Airport Authority, Kenny Jacobs, and other representatives of DAA. Very pleased to welcome Kenny Jacobs, the new CEO of DAA, Ms. Catherine Gubbins, CFO of the DAA, and Mr. Vincent Harrison, the Managing Director of Dublin Airport. And I now ask you, Mr. Jacobs, to make your opening statement on behalf of the DAA. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Members of the committee, good afternoon. Thank you for your invitation to discuss national aviation policy. We look forward to engaging with you on that today. We will also give you an update on security and services at Dublin Airport. This is my first committee outing as DAA CEO. Having joined the business last Monday, I'm very excited to have joined what I think is a great business in Irish aviation. 4 very important business units: Dublin Airport, Cork Airport, Oireachtas International and DAA International. DAA plays a pivotal role in Irish aviation. Both Dublin and Cork airports provide the connectivity that is essential to the success of our island's economic growth, inbound tourism and social cohesion, whilst allowing us to get away for holidays and to see family and friends. As has been well documented, at the end of May last year, there were unacceptable security queues that resulted in flight cancellations at Dublin Airport. The experience at Dublin Airport last summer was not what we wanted, especially on security queues and the overall standards at the airport. Since then, our dedicated team has changed the way we do things to improve security and standards for our passengers and airline customers, and to continue to support and develop our people. And we have more to do, which we'll tell you about today. As the new CEO, my number one priority is to continue to deliver better airports for all passengers. At Dublin Airport, this means a strong focus on operational performance, security, standards and resilience to make sure the travelling public get the service they expect and they deserve. DAA has many stakeholders. In my view, the most important of these stakeholders is the passengers who use our airports. As the gateway to Ireland, Dublin Airport must deliver for both our passengers and airline customers and be appropriately resourced so it has operational resilience through seasons and through various economic cycles. This past Christmas, just under 1.5 million passengers travelled through the airport, and of those departing, 93% went through security in 20 minutes or less, while 99% of passengers went through security in 30 minutes or less. The 30 minutes is a key regulatory standard. The 20 minutes is our own internal target at DAA. That's a strong basis on which to build, and I would personally like to commend all of our staff at Dublin Airport who really put their shoulder to the wheel to deliver for our passengers during this busy peak period. I am, however, very aware that to build on this success and to continue to improve the quality over the course of the year and beyond, 2 key things need to happen. Firstly, there is an industry-wide resourcing issue. At times, that resulted in queues at security and suboptimal airport standards. Issues around baggage handling, aircraft de-icing and opening times for airline check-in also need to be addressed by airlines and ground handlers. We will continue to work with our airlines and handlers to ensure that all of us give passengers a better experience in this regard. Secondly, there needs to be a sustainable pricing and regulatory environment in place to support the provision of consistent service quality levels at Dublin Airport. In this respect, the recent pricing decision by CAR, the aviation regulator, has a direct bearing on the number of staff that Dublin Airport can hire in security, cleaning and other key areas. In its decision, the regulator has disallowed the recruitment of up to 240 of the security staff needed at Dublin by 2026, which in the context of learnings post-COVID is both unwise and inexplicable. It's very clear to us that passengers, airlines, government, indeed this committee, wish to see greater operational resilience at Dublin Airport and to restore efficiency and passenger experience to pre-COVID levels. However, there is a clear misalignment between the service quality standards which policymakers and other stakeholders require from Dublin Airport and the revenues allowed by the regulatory system to fund them going forward. We are not against independent regulation. And we want to have a solid relationship with the regulator, but the modelling done to arrive at the price cap, needs to allow for greater resilience and service levels in our view. Dublin already has the lowest charges of 18 similar-sized airports across Europe. At a time of record cost inflation, when airfares last summer went up by 40% across Europe and are expected to increase by 15 to 20% this coming summer, it makes no sense that airport charges remain substantially less than 2019 levels. In fact, they're 30% less than the 2019 levels. The reality is that charges and passenger that changes in passenger charges have virtually no impact on the price that an airline charges for a flight, so passengers shouldn't expect their airfare to go up. In our view, now is the time to review aviation policy and to reflect the role of all players operating within the aviation ecosystem, including the regulator. We need to reset the system of regulation on charges post the COVID crisis, post the learnings from last summer, and before we have the next economic, health or other crisis. We all want a Dublin Airport that is resilient and can grow and give passengers a better service. If this is what we want, then it must be reflected in national aviation policy, and the regulated price simply must go up. Beyond regulation, I'd like to touch on a few other key areas of aviation policy. As an island nation on the periphery of Europe, Ireland's aviation sector must be enabled to continue to support economic growth and development. An overriding objective of the aviation policy should therefore be to expand existing connectivity and promote new air connections. This is particularly important as we emerge from the COVID crisis and continue to face a relatively unstable international geopolitical and economic landscape. Dublin Airport delivers unrivaled global connectivity for Ireland, ensuring Ireland's largest gateway to continue its development as a key European secondary hub is critical to the economic development of every region in the country. Simply put, when Dublin Airport is winning, Ireland is winning. A secondary hub involves facilitating through traffic and based aircraft and connecting Ireland to a range of destinations that might otherwise be commercially or geographically challenging. Momentum in this area will provide a much-needed boost to our tourism, FDI and aviation sector. A lack of momentum will see us lose connectivity, jobs and opportunities to competing airports, particularly across the UK and also Europe. To facilitate the delivery of connectivity benefits that a hub can provide, DAA plans to invest $1.9 billion in facilities and infrastructure over the coming years. It is therefore hugely important that Dublin Airport is supported by national policies which are progressive and encourage the development of airport infrastructure and growth in passengers and movements. This is particularly important in areas such as planning and regulation. Moving to Cork Airport, it had a very strong performance in 2022 with just over 2.2 million passengers using the airport, and it continues to give passengers an excellent service. I was in Cork last week and I have no doubt that it is one of the best regional airports I have seen across Europe. It is growing and giving the south of Ireland a great choice of destinations, which has increased this coming summer. I want to see Cork continue to grow, and I know there are ambitions to reach 3 million passengers over the coming years. We have plans in place to continue to invest in Cork Airport's infrastructure to support growth, including the delivery of C3 cabin bag screening. Finally, on Cork, I'm aware that there is a review on the Regional Airports programme underway at the moment. This programme has provided valuable support to the airport to rebuild traffic volumes following the pandemic. It is critical that Cork continues to be part of this programme to support the development of the airport into the future. The final point I want to raise, which is key to the future of the aviation sector and something I'm personally committed to, is sustainability. Since 2010, Dublin Airport has reduced its carbon emissions by 26% while welcoming an additional 14 million passengers and expanding the infrastructure at the airport. We have made a commitment to achieve net zero carbon emissions across our operations by 2050. While this is challenging, we fully intend to transition our business to achieve this goal. This will be underpinned by the delivery of energy-efficient measures, fleet changes to zero and low-emission vehicles, and the integration of on-site renewables such as solar PV and the electrification to reduce our campus energy requirements. Looking beyond our own direct operations, airports act as good transport hubs and play a key part in the national shift to public transport. This needs continued focus and support. In particular, we fully support the prioritisation of key public transport projects to Dublin Airport. This includes Metro North and Bus Connects. Increasing public transport options for passengers will ultimately reduce private car dependency and support both DAA's and the government's drive to net zero. We also actively engage with the wider aviation sector on the delivery of key sustainability initiatives such as the use of sustainable aviation fuel or SAF. The airport infrastructure to deliver this already exists. The bigger issue will be securing the supply of SAF in Ireland. I think Ireland should be a leader on SAF in aviation, and we fully support airlines increasing their usage of SAF and investing in newer aircraft that have a lower CO2 per passenger kilometre. Given the rapid advancements in both transport and aircraft technology, we expect that our airports will have to provide for multiple different types of fuelling and powering options at our campus within the next decade, including electric powering and the use of green hydrogen. It is important that aviation policy reflects the future demands of airlines and passengers in terms of fuelling and the impact that it will have on airport infrastructure and planning. Finally, we fully support a single European sky. This would reduce emissions by 10 to 12% immediately by preventing longer than necessary flight lengths caused by inefficient air traffic control across continental Europe. Members, in summary, my objectives for the DAA are to continue to improve the resilience at Dublin Airport. That means security and it means operating standards, to rebuild pride amongst our people, and we have outstanding people in all parts of the business, and to work with our airline customers to deliver growth, so that Ireland has the connectivity it needs and achieves this in a way that is sustainable. Ireland is globally probably the most respected country in aviation. We have a great history and we are currently absolutely fantastic at it when it comes to airlines, when it comes to airports, when it comes to aircraft leasing. Ireland is really, really respected as a leader. We should all be very proud of that. DAA is an important part of this and will continue to be a good part of that in Ireland for the years ahead. Members, thank you for your time and I would be happy to answer questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jacobs. And I now proceed to our first member, Deputy O'Murricu. Go ahead, you've got 12 minutes.
I'd like to congratulate Mr. Jacobs and to thank all the witnesses for coming in front of us. I think a number of people have been in front of us in the last while, and obviously there have been single European sky, I think is the sort of solution that works for everybody in relation to reducing the amount of logistical nightmares that people have with delayed flights and all the rest of it, and then obviously the reduction in relation to emissions because you're reducing the amount of fuel that is wasted. So I think that goes without saying, and that's just something I suppose we need to keep on the agenda, that this government needs to put on the agenda, and that the European Commission has to do whatever it can in relation to delivering. It's just one of those things that I don't think anybody's going to get up and give out about. I suppose if we go back to last summer, we need to make sure what happened last summer, whether it's in relation to baggage handling, whether it's in relation to cancelled flights, whether it's in relation to the mad queuing scenario, that doesn't happen. I welcome the fact that you talked obviously about the streamlining and whatever. Well, the first question is, are we fairly sure that we won't have those difficulties next summer? And we know some of those were the impact of caps at Heathrow and all the rest of it. And then if you could give the numbers in relation to how many staff we have employed, how many we need to employ to make sure that we are at that critical mass.
Okay, thank you. I think everybody agrees that it would be a good thing, and it's a very instant thing that could be done, and nobody wants to spend time sitting on a plane on tarmac. It's still an ongoing thing at EU level, and it would be great. I mean, I've been in aviation for more than a decade, and a decade ago people were calling for it, and we're still kind of waiting for something to happen. To come on to your specific question on are we ready for this summer, I'm very confident that we're doing everything we possibly can do, and the right focus is there to make sure that we get there so that security isn't an issue next summer. Specifically, at the moment we have 645 staff in security. That's roughly in line with where 645. That's in line with where we were in 2019. We are modelling that we want to have more resilience, and we're trying to get up to 800 staff at the peak for the summer, and that gives us a buffer so that if things happen that we've got the right flexibility that we can cope with that. So we're trying to get from 645 to 800. Twice a week we're sitting down saying how many have we hired this week, what's the retention rate that we have this week. I don't think pay is a barrier. 98% of our unionised staff voted in favour of a pay deal as late as November. I think that's a good sign, and many businesses would not have such a positive vote.
You're just like everyone else. It's the difficulty of actually getting people into the job in the first place. And your retention of when you have them in, how is that going?
The retention that I think it'll settle down compared to previous years, because we were in the pandemic and then we had the issues. In the airport and across aviation last summer. So I think in summary, look, it's getting from 645 to 800 every week. You look at, did we recruit enough people? The bit that's in the middle is, do you get people from recruitment to actually working in security quick enough? Last summer we didn't have enough instructors. They're the people who train you to become a member of the security team. We will have 12 instructors, and that's a small number, but it really gets you from recruitment to people actually doing the job. We've added a new role, which is supervisors, and these are very experienced security people who would have worked the lanes, who are now supervisors. Being up at the airport last Saturday, meeting this team, that's a really important role. And the peak of the summer on Good Friday, they're the people who will really keep the show on the road and make sure that we move people from this lane to that lane to make sure that everything's going well. So I'm very confident that we're focusing on the right things. We have the right pace and the right energy on it. We're looking at the key things. The training piece, I think, is broadly done. It's down now to recruiting in a tough market. Everyone in aviation is struggling to find staff. We just make sure that we're doing everything that we can. But as I said, importantly, pay is not a barrier. Of course, we will go faster and make sure that we're recruiting faster and that we reduce the attrition rate.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. So, what is the timeline? I suppose first of all on making that 800, and is there anything that can facilitate you in relation to, if there are any issues? I imagine some of these people may be coming from abroad. And whatever else. And then also, are you happy enough at this point in time as regards the security checks and whatever, that we are getting people through the process fast enough and there are no hold-ups?
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy enough that it's going fine at the moment. Look, Christmas went fine. I gave you the number that 99% went through in 30 minutes or less, 93% in less than 20 minutes. Christmas is really, really busy, and it's a small number of days, but we managed that well. So that gives me the confidence that it's working, and now it's down to every single week hiring more people so that we get up to 800 for the summer peak.
So you're happy enough that there are no logistical hold-ups, that, as regards, as I say, whether it's security checks or whatever else, from the point of view of the people being trained, you're happy enough?
I'm happy enough with the people being trained. Look, are there people who go into the security team that would want to get housing? Yes. If you're coming new to Ireland, does the vetting process take a bit longer? It does. This is something we just have to manage. All the learnings from last year have been applied. So I'm happy enough that we as a management team, that the business is absolutely focused on it, and that means coming down to fast recruitment, getting people into the role, retaining more people. Some of the bits that fell over last summer, we've already dealt with and managed. And now it's a tough market to hire, but it's down to a specific number that every single week we want to make sure that we recruit a specific number of people.
And you're like every other employer, particularly in this part of the world where accommodation is a difficulty and the cost of it. Yeah, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Answer. Yeah, no, and it is something that needs to be. It's just impacting across the board on every element. Yeah. Right. So when do you think we'd make that 800? Well before the summer?
Look, we want to make it as quick. We don't want to make it too quickly. We want to make it in time for really the peak of the summer, which is July and August. Every weekend is a big outbound event. Yeah. We'll be looking at St. Bridget's Day. We'll be looking at St. Patrick's Day. Then you've got the Easter peak. You've got people will be heading away for the Rugby International. So, look, it's a very predictable calendar of what the peaks are when people will be going through T1 and T2 in Dublin. That's up to us to manage, and we will build up to the number that I've given you, the 800 for July and August, and the real peak when residents here, people living here, families will be heading on their holidays.
And you're fairly sure, look, from your point of view, you have your house in order. As regards being impacted by, as I say, when you're dealing with caps across Europe and all the rest of it, do you foresee any major difficulties this summer?
I do.
Yeah.
I hope there are not difficulties in Ireland, and I expect there are not going to be difficulties in Dublin and Cork Airport. As I stand back and look at European aviation, I think resilience is going to be a challenge next summer. I think French air traffic control, Catalonian, German air traffic control will have staffing issues. If they have staffing issues, things slow down. So I expect, I think everyone should expect that it could be a challenging summer. When you stand back and look at Dublin last summer and compare it to Schiphol, compare it to Manchester, compare it to Gatwick, compare it to those airlines that capped their traffic, and you did have to wait 2.5, 3 hours to go through security, and significant swathes of people missed flights, which is totally unacceptable. They would bite your hand off to get the performance that we're giving at the moment. But I think we should all expect it's not going to be back to business as usual. Handlers in certain airports, in certain countries, are still suffering. Look, Ryanair and Aer Lingus, I think, will perform well. But I know a lot of other airlines and I know a lot of airports around Europe where I expect resilience will be a challenge. And particularly the thing I want to call out, and I think the airlines have called out here, air traffic control, in particular French
Yes.
The western part of Germany and Catalonian air traffic control can be something that causes delays in the systems. People might say that's something to do with the airport. It's nothing to do with the airport. But I think we need to make sure, and everybody needs to build in resilience going forward.
And I suppose there has to be an engagement to ensure that, whatever of these difficulties can be dealt with and accepted. And they're beyond your remit or our remit. If I can go back to Christmas, obviously there was the particular issue, and no one's going to blame the DAA or anyone else for the weather that we got. But initially it had been put on the airlines, and we had Aer Lingus in here, and Aer Lingus did say that at an operational level the DAA accepted there were things that could have been done better, that there may have been set-aside areas that need to be put in place, into the future. So if you could just address that. They weren't obviously overly happy with what DAA had said about, it wasn't our fault, for the want of a better term. But beyond that, I suppose what we're very interested in is that this doesn't happen again, and we have the best, whether it's infrastructure or whatever's required, because we will be dealing with cold weather into the future.
Yeah. That cold snap in December, I think comes down to this. It was December 9 was the one day that there would have been issues. I actually happened to be flying myself that morning. The morning was -4 degrees. So I think it was a challenging morning for everybody. Our job in this system is to de-ice the taxiways and the runway. Aircraft de-icing is up to the individual airlines. So we actually don't de-ice the airlines.
I know that, and they accepted that, but they also said at an operational level there was an acceptance that things could have been done better, and that in certain airports there's almost a set-aside area. And I think the idea was that there are logistical constraints within Dublin at this point in time that need to be dealt with as regards de-icing. Like it's all...
I don't accept that there's any logistical things that have moved around on the specific morning that I mentioned. So December 9, we would have had challenges around the aircraft that we would have in the morning, get our crew together and get everything done by lunchtime on December 12th. We were happy that everything was where we wanted it to be. Cancellations happen by airlines in the afternoon and onto the evening. So any of the cancelled flights, that's an airline choice, and that's up to the airlines.
Do you think you'll be able to deal with this
absolutely
into the future?
There were learnings on our part that when you have the cold spell, particularly in the morning, make sure that outside of the taxiways and the runways that we need to focus on.
And there's no major requirement for infrastructure change in relation to this?
This is it's not an infrastructure piece in our view.
Okay. I suppose you've spoken about the 1.9 billion, the infrastructure as regards Dublin Airport. Obviously Michael O'Leary was in front of us, and he wasn't necessarily, what would you say, receptive, or he certainly wasn't too supportive in relation to the underground tunnel. Could you answer that in relation to what is necessary, what I mean, and what needs to be prioritised and what you are prioritising? Yeah, and even answer what he said himself.
I'll answer what he is himself. And look, he's a very important customer. Look, he runs a great business. I think it's the best low-cost airline globally. Specifically on the tunnel, and I'm going to ask Vincent to give you more detail. We think the tunnel is necessary. The regulator insists that the tunnel is necessary from a safety point of view, and that's very, very important. And we've got other airline customers that are in favour of the tunnel because it's going to bring efficiency to their operation. So look, we listen to all customers. Ryanair is our biggest customer. The tunnel is 200 million that we said that's what it could cost. That's what it could cost up to in the context of a 1.9 billion capital programme. And I'm going to ask Vincent to add more colour to that.
Yeah, just in terms of the configuration of the airports, we've got runways north and south now, and we have a runway through the middle, referred to as crosswind runway. That runway has and will have parallel taxiways beside it. So vehicular access across two taxiways and a runway has essentially been ruled out as optional for safety reasons. There are a whole variety of efficiency requirements in terms of access to the western part of our campus that the underpass will give us. We have applied for planning permission for the underpass. We will be applying for planning permission. So what we're talking about now is a project that has been approved for future remuneration as opposed to one that's currently under construction. It is something that even coming back to your question about infrastructure and availability, there are a bunch of, there's 23 stands, parking stands on the western apron. Having those easily accessible, not just by cargo aircraft, but by a range of other standby aircraft or aircraft that one might move to free up space, is critical for providing the resilience at the airport. And that this project is enabling access to those areas in a much more convenient way for processing of activities there, will feed into longer-term growth projects. This is a 50-year asset, so when it comes back in terms of the actual impact on remuneration, it's quite small, but it is quite a high-profile project. We have 159 projects, capital projects, that we presented through our regulatory process in consultation with our airlines. At the end of the process, 158 of those were allowed and brought forward. And I think that's an indication of the degree of general endorsement that there was for the programme across a whole wide range of stakeholders and regulators. Clearly, this is one that has been picked out for comment.
Okay, Cormac.
I'm going to move on now to our next contributor, who is Deputy Lowry, who's taken the speaking slot of Senator Crockwell. They've swapped spots. Go ahead, Deputy Lowry.
Senator Crockwell. First of all, Mr. Jacobs, I'd like to congratulate you on your appointment. Obviously, the DAA is hugely important to our country for economic growth and development, and it does need leadership, it does need commitment, and it does need innovation. And I accept, as everyone does, that Dublin Airport performing well and performing efficiently is hugely important for the entire country, not just Dublin and the Leinster region. In relation to, you make a very stark comment here about the decision of CAR on pricing, and you say that they have, in its decision, the regulator has disallowed the recruitment of up to 240 security staff needed at Dublin by 2026, which in the context of what happened last year post-COVID is unwise and inexplicable. Could you elaborate on that a bit more and tell us, you know, because as a committee, I'm sure we have a role to play in finding the correct balance in terms of your recruitment, but if we need to be in contact with CAR, well then as a committee we should do it. I was interested in the comment you made that in relation to increased airport charges, that they should not impact on the airline ticket price. Now, I think all of us lay people would say that if the charges are higher, well, it reflects in the ticket price. So how are you, could you tell us how you come to that conclusion? Could I also ask you there, in relation to the secondary hub, you set out the reasons why the secondary hub is hugely important to the further development. And then you want to say that the DAA has provided, within its own budgetary parameters, 1.9 million of investment. What is the total investment required to bring a secondary hub on stream, and where do you expect to get that funding from? And what I'd also like, if I could ask the DFA there, Catherine, could you give us a general outline of the financial position of the DAA as it stands at the moment? What kind of reserves have you? What kind of planning in terms of investment? And also, just for those that don't know, including myself, how is your revenue structured? Where does your principal revenue come from? How is it structured? And, you know, ultimately, what is the current position of the DAA from a financial perspective?
So there's four parts to that. I'll at the start, I'll talk about the correlation between the price cap and the price of an air ticket, and I'll deal with the security point and the 240 number. I'll ask Vincent to handle the secondary hub, and Catherine will give you an update on the financial bits. Simply put, having worked on the other side, when it comes on the airline side and now being on the airport side, so I do know how airlines look at it. If you take last summer, for example, airfares ex-Dublin were up significantly. So across 40% in all of Europe. But if you were flying any one of our airline customers out of Dublin last year, you paid a much higher airfare. That's while prices were down. So the price that the airlines pay went down and the price that the customer paid went up. There is no correlation at all. And having been to the side, so if the price that the airport charges the airline goes up, and we have no ambition to be at the average EU airport price. I can't name one airport across Europe that charges airlines as low as we charge. And I've worked in the airline industry. So no European capital. We have no ambition to be a Heathrow. And forget about their pricing, Charles de Gaulle's prices. But if you take Lisbon, if you take Madrid, if you take Vienna, if you take Rome, all of these capital city airports are charging airlines significantly more and always have. We don't want to get to the average EU price, and there is no correlation between us putting up the price. We want to stay really, really low on price. If the price cap goes up, it doesn't mean that the travelling public will pay higher airfares. I know that from having worked the airline side. Airline fares go up and down based on supply and demand and the load factor that they want to achieve. So airlines can make more money, fares can go down in higher priced airports than Dublin Airport. So there's no correlation, having worked both sides of the fence. On the security point and the number of 240, I would just draw you to the year 23 and 26, so over that 3-year period, the car modelling, and again I want to say, we're not against independent regulation. We want to have a good relationship with the car. We want the modelling process and specifically the inputs they use to the modelling process to be the right modelling inputs. They've modelled that we need at Dublin Airport 750 security staff in the year 2023 to 2026. Our modelling is that we need 1,000 security staff in that 3-year period. That's based on what we think the airlines want to do, the number of people that will go through the terminals, Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. It's based on the C3 scanners that we want to introduce at Dublin Airport, which will give passengers a better experience. You have to take less stuff out of your bag, but also building in resilience. I think, look, last summer wasn't a resilient summer for all of aviation. I've already called out that this summer there's going to be challenges. Our job as a management team is to make sure that those challenges don't exist at Dublin and Cork Airport. But to build in that resilience, we think we need 1,000 security staff from 23 to 26. The difference between their 750 and 1,000 is the 240, the 250 that's there. But again, we're not against independent regulation. We want to have a good relationship with the regulator. We won't agree on everything. We're not agreeing at the moment on what the price cap could be, but if the price goes up, and again, it's really, really important, we do not want to be at the average EU price of a capital city airport. We embrace having a low price because it's a good thing. And I think that's not the case with everything in Ireland, but that will not result in airfares going up. I'm going to ask Vincent to talk about the secondary hub, and then Catherine can cover finances.
Thanks, Kenny. And just in relation to that airport charges piece, if I could say, a typical customer that flies between Dublin and Heathrow, and indeed that's the second busiest air route in the world, pays Dublin Airport €8 this year for the privilege of using Dublin Airport. They pay Heathrow £30 for the same service in a larger airport with greater economies of scale. Both of those obviously get aggregated into the fare that you have. I think that shows at one extreme the degree of price competitiveness we have with the offer, but clearly you have to operate in 2 airports if you're flying to that destination. In relation to the hub, just to explain the type of facilities, Terminal 2 and all of that operation is where Aer Lingus and our other long-haul carriers operate, and where the bulk of our transferring passengers change aircraft. What we plan to do is to build another pier perpendicular to Pier 2, which is for parking aircraft, to greatly expand the apron area within that area, to expand facilities like US pre-clearance and assorted other works. So when we talk about it as a project, it is a collection of a range of projects which are in and around 600 million in terms of cost for the development of that area. There's quite a considerable amount of relocation of existing facilities that are in that area, and therefore there may be other associated projects like new cargo facilities when we relocate those. So quite a substantial investment. Not all of that happens within the 4-year period that we're describing here that's in the determination. So not all of that is within the 1.9 million described, but it is all planned for completion during this decade.
But is the 600 million, is that the rest with the DAA in its entirety, or is there contributors to that?
The DAA is entirely self-funding, and Catherine can pick up this point you asked about our revenue sources. We receive no contribution from anybody, the state included, in terms of our financing. So our model is, and if we leave aside for a second the international businesses, but our 2 airports are reliant on aeronautical charges, which is what we charge to airlines for the services that are provided, and those are obviously passed through to passengers, and our commercial activities, whether they are revenues from a wide range of, from car parking, from retail, from concessions, food and beverage, etc. So the combination of those gives us the revenue stream, and obviously we have to run both our operating costs of doing business and our investment from that revenue stream. Now, within Dublin, where the regulatory environment comes in, is all of those things are taken into account, and essentially our commercial revenues are forecasted forward, our costs are forecasted forward, and what we're allowed as an aviation charge is the residual. It's what the regulator determines to be sufficient for us to do business over the coming years. Our complaint with this is the degree of contingency, resilience, etc., that is factored in there, because there are a whole range of assumptions that go into that, a whole range of what the regulator would refer to as building blocks. I would put it simply, if you take a haircut on every one of those, you end up with a lot of hair lost by the time you aggregate it across our operating costs, our investment program, our commercial revenues, etc. And that is why, as Kenny has said, our ambition to be a highly competitive airport by reference to the airports that we compete with traffic for across Europe remains, but there is a lot of headroom in there from the price that we're at to what would still be very competitive compared to average charges across Europe.
But that's the reason I asked the question. Like, it's a massive investment, and from what Vincent is saying, you have to fund it from within your own resources. So what's the prospects of doing that?
Thanks, Deputy. Yeah, look, I mean, it is an important point that Vincent has called out. The group is completely self-funding. So I suppose one of our key priorities is that we protect our financial profile, that we maintain our credit rating, and that we have, a credible story when we're going out to the external markets, that we continue to be able to borrow. And I suppose the overall price cap and trajectory there is absolutely a key component of our ability to engage with the rating agency and with the external investor community, so that they have confidence in our ability to fund and borrow and invest in that capital programme over the next number of years. And I suppose as part of our engagement with the regulator, we would have highlighted significant concerns and how they approach that, how they consider our ability to fund ourselves, particularly, I suppose, when we've come off the back of the COVID period, which I think really, demonstrated the exposure that the aviation industry in general has to, significant pandemics, and obviously the general economic cycle, which is a point we would have made to them historically. So look, we feel that we're in, that, as Vincent said, we feel that they have left us too little margin to deal with the potential risk that might be around the corner, particularly when we look at the general macroeconomic environment and, as we face into an environment of increasing interest rates, for example. So, look, it is important that we're able to fund ourselves. As I said, it's a priority for us. So I suppose the challenge now for us is to try and effect that as we move forward. But certainly, our concern around that would be a significant element of our concern with the regulatory price cap.
Okay, but Chairman, just in conclusion, I think it's very important that we take this up with the regulator, because the development and the expansion of the airport, which is obviously critical to our economic growth and development, is central. The position that they hold is central to the ability of the DAA to actually raise the funds and implement the development plans. And just final point is a mundane point, but in all of this development and expansion, obviously you're going to have increased numbers going through the airport. I've seen at Christmas, I went through the airport on 2 occasions, and I have to say it was very competently run. There was no issues. But one thing that's standing out for everyone at the moment attending Dublin Airport is car parking and accommodation. Is there any, in your overall plan for this development, are you taking that into account? Because car parking is a nightmare at the airport, and so is accommodation.
I'll ask Vincent to give you more colour on car parking. Look, there's things we want to fix. There's still things we want to fix at Dublin Airport. Car parking we want to improve, taxis we want to improve, fast track we want it to work all the time and be faster. The general standards, toilets, seats in both T1 and T2, but in particular T1, we want to have more seats there, and we want to be a pleasant experience. It needs to be really, really effective. You need to be able to get up to the terminal, through the door, through security in 20 minutes or less, be able to get a cup of coffee or a sandwich, get to your gate quickly and get a seat. And that's if you're travelling on your own. If you're with a family and it's Good Friday, it's even more important. So we have a big, long list of things that we want to constantly improve at the airport. Car parking was a challenge last summer, and I'll ask Vincent to kind of outline our plans so we actually can make that a better part of what customers will get as they come to the airport next summer.
Yeah, simply put, during the summer, there was a large quantum of car park capacity that had been taken out of the market. In fact, wasn't in the market for the last 3 years. We would be hopeful that that capacity will be in place during the summer. In general, and we've in the opening statement, we've made statements about our support for all modes of transport, and particularly public transport to the airport. I think it is important for members to be aware that within the planning environment that we deal with, additional supply of additional car parking to the airport is something that is not particularly favoured within the planning system, and is difficult. We continue to make the case to demonstrate that all modes of transport need to be catered for. Approximately 1 in 4 people who use the airport use a car park. So all of the other provisions of transport are equally important. But as I said, we would be hopeful that there will be greater provision of car parking spaces within the capacity that is there for next summer.
Okay, thanks very much, Deputy Director. Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. Now, our next contributor should be Senator Boylan, but she's not here. Deputy O'Rourke, do you want to take Senator Boylan's slot? Yeah, go ahead then.
Thanks very much to the witnesses, and sorry I missed the opening statement. I was just in the chamber. And I know there's lots, and we've heard it in recent times in terms of the expansion and the vision for Dublin Airport. I want to focus in my contribution on recent expansion and the DAA's approach to it and delivery of it, and specifically the North Runway. I'm my party spokesperson on transport, but also a TD for Meath East, which verges on the airport, and lots of people obviously depend on the airport and work in the airport, but you'll be aware of the real frustration of communities when they woke up to the noise of aircraft that they weren't expecting, and reasonably weren't expecting. And I think a lot of the time when we hear this conversation, people say, well, sure, people live beside an airport, what did they expect? But I'm talking to very many people, St Margaret's and the North County Dublin area, the East Meath area, who had done their due diligence, who had done the planning piece, who checked flight paths and weren't to be affected, and now find themselves absolutely affected. Now, this is something we've raised with you. we see that there was an acknowledgement in relation to it that new SIDs, standard instrument departures, are to come into effect from the 23rd of February. Can you just confirm if that means that new flight paths will operate from the 23rd of February? What did the community say to me? Like, what does this mean? What do they look like? How are we going to be affected by it? Why don't we know? Why haven't we been engaged with what assessment has taken place of buildings? Because I'm working on the basis that homes and buildings have been insulated that aren't affected by flight paths, and other homes and buildings, school buildings included, haven't been insulated and are affected by flight paths. So it seems like an unmerciful cock-up, to be honest. And can you outline, what's happening on the 23rd of February, and what households and businesses and schools are going to be affected, and how they are going to be engaged with it? Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. I'm going to ask Catherine to give you the details of that. Look, we're very keenly aware on the issues related to the flight path. Immediately when this was found out, we engaged with the regulatory bodies involved and with the local communities, which is something we do on a regular basis. So with the North Runway, over the past year, we've engaged with the local community 41 times. So we take this very seriously, and it will change, as you've called out, on February 23rd. I'm now going to ask Catherine to give you more detail on that.
Yeah, just to acknowledge again, Deputy O'Rourke, it was a very unexpected development once the North Runway went operational on the 22nd of August, but we started to engage with both the regulatory authorities and our neighbours, immediately. I suppose that we became aware of this. I suppose just for a little bit of context, the determination of a flight path off a new runway is an incredibly complex and highly regulated development, and I suppose we would have engaged back in 2016 with the various regulatory authorities when we were trying to do our modelling around understanding the potential impacts that the new runway was going to have on the neighbours. And we would have, I suppose, at that point in time had an understanding that, the interpretation of ICAO's safety direction would have resulted in aircraft having to fly 1 nautical mile after takeoff and then banking right. And all of our modelling, again, engaged with regulators at the time, was based on that. I suppose move forward 6 years later, when the runway was about to become operational, the regulatory authorities at that point in time had to stand back and actually develop the flight path for the runway. That wasn't a process that we were necessarily involved in, and I suppose there was a change in, once you came to actually determining the relevant flight path, there was a change in some of the criteria that were applied, and I suppose, in simple terms, that meant that aircraft had to reach a certain height and then they could turn right rather than going a specified distance. So I suppose that is, in simple terms, what gave rise to the deviation in the flight path that materialised at the time. It was a surprise to us. We began our engagement with the regulatory authorities immediately at the time. And this, as I said, it's a complex and highly regulated process. And unfortunately, it has required a significant amount of engagement with the ANSP, the SRD, IAA, and, a lot of work needs to happen to make sure that the ultimate flight path that is here, that also needs to be promulgated and, uploaded to the various aircraft and pilots who use the airport. So it's a very complex and, unfortunately, time-consuming process. We started that immediately. It has been ongoing. We've been intensively engaged with all of the relevant authorities to try and get this resolved as quickly as possible. And thankfully, we're now in a position to communicate to neighbours that the 23rd of February is when the flight path should revert to something that's more closely aligned to what we would have originally modelled.
And are those 2016 models, are they? Is that what you're saying? They
are going to be very closely aligned to the modelling that would have been done and consulted on with both neighbours and the planning authority at that time, yeah.
Okay, and when will residents get to see those?
I believe that the IAA have actually published details of that flight path earlier on today. So, again, as we move closer to finalising this process, the various communication around what that flight path is, the impact it's going to have, will become apparent over the immediate.
Okay, and in terms of the assessment of that impact and insulating properties? When does that happen?
That's going to be ongoing from now, and it is something we have been considering clearly as we've worked with the authorities to try and realign the flight paths to what had been originally anticipated. We have been considering ourselves the potential impact, and look, as we understand that, that becomes clearer over the next while, we will be considering what mitigation measures can be made available to any houses that are impacted. Yeah. Where that hadn't been previously advertised to them.
And just in terms of, like, you've said it out there, but it raises the question, like, how a scenario like this arises. Like, if is it the case that the DAA, like, where does the fault lie? Is it with the DAA or is it with the regulators? Like, I would have presumed if it wasn't with yourselves that because there's cost, I assume, associated with this.
I would say that it's not with either party directly. I suppose we had engagement in 2016 to understand the inputs that were required with regard to modelling, which was for a specific purpose. Yeah. I suppose, as I said, 6 years later, the regulatory authorities were trying to determine the actual flight path. I suppose, it probably fell between two stools in that regard, given the passage of time. I think from our perspective, that's...
Yeah, but from another perspective, you could say the exercise you engaged in at the outset was a complete waste of time. In the sense that a completely different model was fair enough, criteria might have changed, but like, whose due diligence, your own, in terms of identifying that those criteria have changed, or the regulators to say, what you've submitted is out of date?
The process was pretty robust at the time. Yeah. I mean, we would have had a lot of engagement over a long period of time. It's very technical, complex, and I think it was definitely fit for purpose at that point in time, albeit for a different purpose.
So two things. The number of properties, so you've insulated a lot of properties, noise insulation. Do you have an assessment of how many were insulated that, had the right model been applied, wouldn't have needed insulating? And over what period do you think that there will be an assessment of what properties will now need insulating and anything else that goes with it?
I think in general our approach to the insulation and other soundproofing, with regard to houses' impact, has been to do more rather than less. So I think we've insulated about 150 houses. We propose, I think the total number of houses that we're committed to insulating is 200, so 150 of those have been done already. And I think in general we have gone over and above the requirements that were placed on us under the planning permission that was in place. So we don't regard houses as having been insulated unnecessarily, to be honest. On the basis that we're trying to go back to the original flight path, I don't think that's an issue per se. What we're going to try and understand over the next period is, are there houses who are now going to be impacted that we hadn't previously assessed? We will consider what mitigation measures we can make available to those houses, certainly.
Oh, okay. And can I ask then, in terms of, so there was an application, was there, in 2007, your reference in 2016. I'm just wondering, this piece of, I know Fingal County Council have issued enforcement notice. I just wonder the basis on which you're operating now and the basis on which you will operate on the 23rd of February. In terms of planning, in terms of the regulator, will they have been adequately through those processes, or do you need to seek retention, are there other enforcement notices expected, or is the DAA of the opinion from the 23rd of February that they will be entirely sound to operate those flight paths in terms of the regulators and the planning authority and the ANCA, of all the various parameters which you have to live within.
Yeah. And there are two separate issues at play here. I suppose you've referenced the deviation in the flight path, and that specific issue will hopefully be resolved on the 23rd of February, as we've discussed there. That the actual flight paths, whether they're deviated or the original, are not a factor of our planning permission.
Okay.
You've referenced 2007. The North Runway was constructed under a planning permission that was granted in 2007, and absolutely you're right. We are currently engaged in a process which the noise regulator ANCA has made a decision on. That's been appealed to on board Planola, so we are actually in a process of engagement around separate conditions to do with that 2007 planning permission, which is a completely separate process to our mind to the flight deviation issue that we had previously discussed. So I suppose as of the 23rd of February, we are very hopeful that the new flight path will be in place, and hopefully that issue will be resolved, and we are in the middle of a statutory process which absolutely needs to run its course over the next few months. And
so picking up on that point, from your assessment, and I presume you've been advised in relation to this, the community might reasonably ask if there are planning conditions 2007 being contested, but the runway is being operated at the same time, are the DAA of the opinion that they are operating the North Runway on a sound basis, despite the fact that there are ongoing legals in relation to the planning?
Absolutely. I mean, we're in the middle of a statutory process. We're having good engagement with ANCA on board Planola and Fingal County Council in relation to that. I suppose, given that we're in the middle of a legal and statutory process, it isn't. I'm not able to comment.
It would only be on the outcome of that, were it to give an indication that you need to do X, Y, and Z, that you would have to operate.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Maybe from my own benefit, just to confirm that you're operating the North Runway on the basis of the existing planning permission, as opposed to what you'd like the planning permission to be into the future. Yeah. Thanks. Our next speaker is now Senator Crockwell. You have 12 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Jacobs. Congratulations on your appointment. Tough role ahead of you, I would think. At the outset, I have used Dublin Airport quite a lot since the airport has opened up, and I want to take this opportunity to compliment the staff that work under you, particularly those who work at the coalface in security and the like. I have never yet met one that was bad-humoured, albeit that they were under severe pressure. I think it's a mark of the type of people that you employ, that they're able to cope with such swell of people from time to time. So congratulations on that to all involved out in Dublin Airport. Now, I want to talk about the issue of car parking. As far as I'm aware, you operate the red, the green, the blue, and two short-term car parks, the one at T2 and the one at T1. And I have to say, I see them as the greatest rip-off that ever existed in this country with the costs of parking in Dublin Airport. It is absolutely outrageous, the charges that there are there for people travelling out of the country. Given that you've pointed out yourself, 1 in 4 passengers travelling through Dublin Airport are travelling and parking their cars there. And that's down to the policy of this country that we haven't put proper infrastructure in place to be able to get to the airport, although I would again compliment all of the different bus companies that are now feeding passengers into the airport, and I hope that improves things. But two things, I suppose, that's on my mind. One is Dublin Airport is self-funding. Are you charging the enormous charges you're charging for car parking to fund something else? That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm aware of the fact that the former Quick Park went up for tender recently. And I understand, and maybe you'd confirm for me, that DAA has won that competition to purchase. Why, in God's name, would you want to buy another car park? I thought you were into competition. Isn't Ryanair brought us from a situation where nobody could afford to fly to everybody can now afford to fly? It's like jumping on a bus. Why would you want to own all of the car parks? Would you care to address that first for me, please?
Okay, I'm actually going to ask Vincent to talk about the car parking. I'd like to, well, thank you for welcoming me into my new role. I think I love your comment about the staff at security. I was a big fan of going through Dublin Security when I worked for an airline. I think it was always really great. There's great people there that make it a seamless process. And I think from the issues at the end of May last year up until now and Christmas and everything that happened, I think it's testament to the character that they have. and the pride that they have in the role that they do, and they really are the people who make it happen. So it's a great team. They worked really, really hard. It's a team that we want to grow and really make airport security something that is just always seamless, nearly always seamless. There will always be Good Friday, there'll always be Easter Saturday morning, and it's just difficult when you have that big an operation. But it's an absolutely great team. And they're the ones that make it happen. I'm going to hand over to Vincent to talk more about car parking, how it works, what we'd like to do so that we make it a good service, how it compares to prices, we'll say, for downtown parking in Dublin, and how short-term car parking is very different to long-term car parking that people would use when they're heading in their holidays, and how that ties in with, we'll say, people coming up from wider Leinster who will use the longer-term car parks to get to the terminal to go on their holidays. So I'll hand over to Vincent on that. Thank you.
Yes, Senator. The Dublin Airport provides about 26,000 car parking spaces, split between short-term and long-term. Our products are, in technical terms, yield managed. So essentially the demand determines the price at particular times of the year. Prices are lower or higher depending on demand. Typically, the type of length of stay that one might have in a short-term car park, which obviously has the convenience of being next to the terminals, might be 1, 2, 3 days, a lot of short trips, business trips, etc. And people would be familiar that the longer-term car parks would typically be for longer stays and have bus provision. And there's a range of choice. So the colour schemes that you quoted there have different service levels, or closer or further from the terminals, and there's quite different pricing regimes. So you already have competition essentially within the car park structure, or choice for consumers. For the last number of years, the car park that you referred to, previously operated by Quick Park, has not been in operation. And that car park was publicly made available for sale earlier this year. Among the discussions that we had during the summer here related to the shortage of car parking spaces available at the airport and the consequent impact on pricing. At the time and in other forums, we explained, for example, that our long-term car parking pricing on a per-day rate was, our system essentially established a cap of €15 per day. I can 100% guarantee, for the limited number of hours that I have parked my car in a local car park here, I will pay more for that, for the presence here at the meeting, than one would do for an overnight 24-hour stay at Dublin Airport. When that car park became available for sale, we expressed our interest. We are in a process. We do not own the car park as yet, but we would be optimistic or hopeful that in consultation with stakeholders, including regulatory stakeholders, and completion of contractual terms, that we would be hopeful that we would be in a position to provide that extra car parking capability to the public for next summer, if that transpires, that we are in a position to complete that sale.
Can I ask you, I mean, I'm going to declare my hand here. When I heard that DAA were in the competition, I was rather surprised. Then when I heard that you won the competition, I was even more surprised. So I've asked the Competition Authority to look into this. I don't believe that it's right that you should have all the car parking within the confines of Dublin Airport. But I do believe the sale is conditional on the Competition Authority approving it. And that is a process which could go in any direction and take any length of time as the regulatory authorities seek to ensure that the public's interest is protected, if you want. Have you a contingency plan in place if this just doesn't go right? Or have you a leasor that would take it as a sort of a lease from Dublin Airport Authority to run and manage it. I mean, opening up Quick Park, it's been locked up for a long time now, so opening it up is going to take time and it's going to take a lot of planning. So if things go askew, have you got a contingency plan in place?
Well, first of all, I think for all the reasons that you've called out there, it would be preferable that these processes completed quickly and smoothly, and clearly among the stakeholders that we are actively and proactively engaging with are the authority that you mentioned. We considered a whole variety of contingency measures last year when it was apparent that there were not that there wasn't sufficient availability of capacity, including discussions as to whether we could indeed lease short-term that car park. That was not made available to us and did not come to fruition. We also engaged with the department to see whether we could achieve fast-track emergency provision to enable us to expand car parking into other temporary areas. Again, that was not considered to be capable to be provided by the department and the minister. So there are a whole range of ways that we sought to make available more capacity. We engaged in extensive promotion of alternative routes to the airport, use of public transport. We have engaged with the Department of Transport again in relation to bus provision, because one of the things that has happened in relation to the return of public transport is that while in the middle of the day many of the services have returned, in the early hours and night time, when either our staff are looking to access the airport for early starts, or indeed many of the passengers are coming for early morning flights, that type of capacity has not been properly restored yet in the public transport system. So there are indeed a range of contingencies that we have sought and will continue to seek, but they're not all entirely within our gift.
Yeah.
And clearly we are absolutely anxious, and we made this our number one priority, to say if there is available existing capacity, rather than leaving it closed and shuttered, we are interested in making it available to
on the
passengers.
contingency side of things, I mean, if this committee can be of assistance, I would ask you to make any submission that you feel is necessary, because my interest is not to support the private sector or any sector. My interest is that we get competition for the end user, the consumer, and I felt that having all the car parking space just didn't smack up right. If I'm correct, there was 5 or 6 entities expressed an interest in Quick Park, and if I'm right, you were actually the lowest bidder, which has, I understand, annoyed quite a number of the other entities, and they thought there was a second round coming along that hasn't come along. So, I mean, that's between the vendors.
I think you'd have to take that up with the vendors.
Yeah, yeah.
Might just be careful
in no problem.
questioning it.
Yeah, no.
And sorry,
I'm not suggesting anything.
Sorry, Senator
and
Croft,
we're only 40 seconds left, so
just to your original point to Vincent, I suppose our primary priority here is that the car parking space is available. Back to the original point around the commercial revenues that we generate, simplistically with regard to our overall regulatory model that we've discussed, all of that incremental commercial revenue is ultimately taken into account to reduce the price cap. So, this isn't an opportunity for us to make incremental revenue. Ultimately, it's all taken into account.
You would accept if you had a monopoly, you could.
Ultimately.
but not to your ultimate benefit.
No, exactly.
Okay, thank you, Senator Crockwell.
Yeah. Okay, listen, thank you very much, and thank you for your candour. I appreciate it.
And I suppose just about, is it fair to say that the more places you have, you're talking about demand pricing, that the average price should fall?
It would, yes.
Yeah, look, that's our intention. We don't want people to have this summer the issue of, am I going to have an issue getting parking? We don't want anyone to be in their heads, am I going to have an issue at security? We want to take these things off the table. More spaces means that it's supply and demand. If there is more capacity in the system, notwithstanding everything Vincent has said, regardless of who owns it, if there's more supply, the price should come down. Look, taking a longer term view, as we said in our statement, we want Metro North and Bus Connects to work. We've got a space reserved between T1 and T2 short-term car parks near the church at the airport. That's where we want the station to be, and we want that to happen too in the longer time frame, so that you have better public transport options to go to the airport. For those who are coming up from Laois, from Kildare, from all parts of the country to fly from Dublin, that they can, on a big holiday, stay in a long-term car park. If you're going tomorrow on a short-term business trip, that you can get a short-term space. And supply and demand will determine the price, but we want to provide a good service.
Metro North, there's also people who are advocating for a spur from Swords.
I'll let maybe somebody else take that point up, because you've
just
concluded
wondered,
with this
could
point.
you accommodate two stations?
Senator Dooley, you're next. You've
Thanks
got 5
very
minutes.
much,
Go
Chair.
ahead. Thanks.
Like others, I want to welcome Mr Jacobs, Mr Harrison and Ms Gubbins. Thank you for being with us. Your predecessors have been here in the past, and I think you may have been here with Ryanair in the past, or certainly some of your representatives anyway. And I think your insight into the aviation sector will be helpful to the overall mix out there. Before I get into my own sort of series of questions, I just want to maybe carry on from what Senator Cropwell said there. Would you confirm that there was no requirement on that site that you're in advanced negotiations to purchase on that remaining as a car park? Could it be the case that if it hadn't been secured by yourself, it's a valuable site in North County Dublin, could it be the case that it might not have ended up as a long-term car park? Just maybe some clarity on that. And then just to sort of get into areas that have kind of an interest from my point of view, just looking at Dublin Airport first. As I see it, and unfortunately I use Dublin Airport far more than I'd like. I prefer to be able to do a lot more at Shannon, but I'll get into that afterwards. It seems to me there's two issues as a user of the airport. Infrastructurally, it's poor, and I think Terminal 2 in particular is probably a much poorer user experience from a security perspective than it should be. And I wonder, have you done any, or had any expertise from outside come in and look at your security system in terms of the passage of people through security? For an airport that opened in 2010, it's a pretty poor offering by comparisons to what's available in older airports around the world. Even if it's just a simple thing like the basket coming back. It has to be pushed back many times, it gets stuck, it doesn't get back. Whereas in Terminal 1 at least, you have an automated system. You use the airport regularly, so you'll be familiar with it. It just, by comparisons to other airports, and you've compared other capitals, and I'm not talking about the best, but I'm talking about the average or the mid-term, it's a poor user experience. You talked about cleanliness and that, and I mean, you know about those issues, they need to be addressed over time. And also it seems to me, and I think you've identified one of the upgrade projects in terms of a further pier, which, I mean, the user experience late at night coming back, you're travelling into Terminal 2, you're landing at gates that are more adjacent to Terminal 1, and you have to track all the way back. I mean, it's not great morning and evening, which is where most of the people that are regular users of the airport use. So maybe just talk to us about that in terms of your plans to improve the user experience within the airport. Talk to us about what studies you have done in relation to a better use of the space that's in security. You've talked about staffing. Yes, that's important. You talk about the new system, which is similar to this introduced in Corry and in Shannon, and obviously we know the complexities about that. But just talk to us about the time and motion studies, if you have done any, the sort of user experience going through there, because I think that's a huge problem. Next, what I'd like you to talk to us about, I mean, a lot of people would suggest that Dublin Airport is close to capacity. Now that you have a second runway, the terminal capacity is close to capacity. Yes, you can do a little bit more with some new gates, etc., that would help the user experience, but it's getting close to capacity. You have Cork. We talked about competition earlier, and there was a view at the time. I didn't agree with it, but it happened. The separation of Shannon out of Cork and Dublin. Do you think there's an argument now to build a closer alliance between the three main airports in the state, between Cork, Dublin and Shannon, under some kind of a broad umbrella, similar to the CIE model that existed, where you have 3 entities somewhat in competition, but not really, because there's no competition for Dublin, reality, there isn't. London maybe, or Portugal or somewhere like that, but there is no competition within the state. Is there any argument, as the purpose of us having you here is to feed into our development of a future strategy for aviation, and we'll hit you with the little bits and pieces within your own remit. But overarching, is there an argument now that says the 3 airports, notwithstanding that you're regulated entities and that the regulator technically addresses that competitive environment, is there an argument, or is there a reason why we should be all working more closely together to better maximise what we get through in an easier way? It seems to me, without getting into the major detail of it, that there's very little cargo that couldn't go through Shannon. Now, I know cargo in the belly hold of passenger aircraft, no, obviously, but direct cargo flights, transit business that you still bid for and fight for, where there's no on and off the aircraft. Any reason for you to be in that space that would be further decluttering an already busy airport? Business that could readily make a difference to the likes of Shannon. I mean, I think Shannon is losing out significantly because of the sort of behemoth that Dublin and Cork have together. So I'd be interested in your thoughts around those couple of issues.
Okay, thank you, Senator. There's 4 things I'll identify there. So I'm going to ask on the first thing you asked on the conditions of the site and on cargo and capacity. I'm going to ask Vincent to touch on that. I'll take you through some of the things we want to do on Dublin experience, customer experience, the experience a passenger has going through Dublin. I'll talk about the security piece, time and motion studies. If I can, just on the competition piece, I fully agree Ireland needs a broader national aviation policy. We absolutely need to have that, and that should cover Dublin, that should cover the regions, that should cover regulation, who's involved, that should cover growth, sustainability, all those key things. So I think everybody should want that, so that we can stand back and say, what type of aviation do we want? We're great at it. We have great airlines, we have great airports, we have a great heritage, we have an incredible role in the leasing industry in the world, and everybody should really, really proud. Irish absolutely lead. If you go out to our Middle Eastern business partners, they say, wow, the Irish are the best at this in the world. So I think that's great, and we should have to have a national aviation policy here on the island itself. Speaking as the DAA, and also having worked on the airline side, I think the competition piece, competition is great, competition's needed. I think there is, and the competition really is within the regions. So I'm from Cork, I'm down in Cork Airport, I've used Shannon Airport a lot, and I would have in the past. The competition is between Cork, Shannon, Knock and Kerry, the regional airports, and they've always been competing, and it's a good, healthy competition. Dublin's competition is the big international hubs. So from an airline point of view, you don't look at a route and say, right, we've got Dublin Lanzarote, are we going to move it to Cork Lanzarote or Shannon Lanzarote? You'll add those routes if it makes sense. You'll get the load factor and you'll make the right economic return that you want on them. So airlines don't look at it and say, we can put this route in Dublin or we can put it in other places. They look at a good bit of healthy competition between Cork, Shannon, Kerry, Knock, and they'll do what they do as airlines. That's a question for them. So I think competition is a good thing. You want healthy competition. It's at a regional level as the airlines look at it, and then it's Dublin versus the big international hubs.
Do you not accept with Dublin as the parent of Cork that it gives Cork an unfair advantage in that mix?
I don't think it does. Cork's.
I wouldn't expect you to, but
no, Cork's very different. Cork's very different, and it's competing with Shannon, and it's part of the regional. It's part of the regional program. Look, it's a great Southern Ireland.
Yeah, and look, the reality is, I want Cork to work as well.
Yeah,
I have family in Cork, and we all want to see the regions. But I just think that Shannon's being starved to some extent, notwithstanding the wonderful work that Mary Considine and her team are doing there. It's always against a backdrop of some of the kind of business that I talked about, the transit and the cargo. Relatively small amount that would make such a difference to that airport. And it's not just about the airport, it's the community that it serves and it's the employment that it retains in the region.
Which is massively important, and those kind of things need to be baked into what is the national aviation policy. Okay. But really...
So would you be adverse to then, from a Dublin perspective, accepting in a new paradigm that the bulk of cargo should be forced through or should be directed through a regional airport, other than that which would operate in the belly?
I would be adverse to that.
Okay, so right, and then for transit business, that of which there's nobody getting on or off, where it's just transit. Would you be prepared to accept that you could lose that, or that you could allow that to go to another airport?
Look, we wanted to come to Dublin, and we think Dublin is competing with other international hubs. Cork as a regional airport, Shannon as a regional airport.
But I'm not talking about hub. I'm talking about where it's just a technical stop, where it's just landing for refuelling. Do you think there's any need for that to be going through Dublin?
I'm going to ask Vincent to cover that one and touch on cargo and capacity when we come back. But broadly speaking, from a all of Ireland point of view, Dublin's competing with the international hubs, the regional airports, and they're all important, are competing with each other, and both competitions exist. If I can touch on Dublin Airport, and then Vincent will take that other part. Look, things need to improve. I look at T1 and T2. I will go up there every morning and see how the first wave is going. I can't think of a European airport that I haven't gone through, and I'd have loads of views on what do I think works well and what doesn't work well. T1, it's an old building. It's a building where that's where the Ryanair flights go out of. It gets very, very narrow in parts. I know what the key things that need to work at an airport are, which you can park, you can get through fairly quickly, you get through security quickly. I don't want it to be an anxious moment when you come into T1 and go, I can't see security, how is it going to be? Is there a big group of people coming back? We want you to get through security in 20 minutes or less. We then want you to be able to walk to the pier, get everything you're looking for, clean toilets, everything that works. We want clean terminals. We will do a bit of decluttering because, I mean, if you flew from T1 or T2 today, it would be a great experience at this time of day. If you're going on Good Friday morning on an early morning flight to Lanzarote, it's a totally different thing. So it's setting ourselves up for those big 20 outbound days that are cup final days for us, that we're absolutely at our best. And look, it's the constant grind then of cleaning, staffing and security, staffing everywhere so that it's a really, really efficient operation, making sure that the right food and beverage options are there for our customers. We want to add more seats in T1 because on those big mornings, like Good Friday, we need them. And there's plenty of things that we want to look at in T2 as well. Specifically on security that you mentioned, we're always doing time and motion studies to say what's the best way to do it. As I said, I've gone through nearly every European airport, and you see security done well and done in different ways. You have to constantly look and say, well, what's the new technology that helps? So the C3 scanners are good because you have to take less stuff out of your bag, and that just takes a bit of the stress away. They actually require more staff from our point of view, and the footprint that they require is slightly different. The automatic tray return that you mentioned, that's another good thing that just helps the process, that you're just sticking it there and it automatically comes back. Staffing levels, what the staff say to you as you're doing what we call divestment, which is taking out what you need out of the bags until we have the C3 scanners. The supervisor role that we've added in this past year. So, our most experienced security people who've worked the lanes, who know what good looks like, they're the ones who kind of just marshal the whole process through. And it really is about that really early morning peak that we want to get right, and having that visibility of leadership there. And they're great people and they do an important role. So we're always looking at other airports and what's the best way to do it. In some ways, T2, it's easier to do things because it's got more space, and more of the traffic goes through T1. And we want the two products not to be totally dissimilar because there's a lot of passengers will use both terminals in a given year. So we do want them aligned. And look, like anything, then it's into the constant grind of how do you make sure that every single day it's where you want it to be in terms of standards, in terms of staffing. You'll have bad days, and we will have bad days. We will have bad days next summer. Every airline will have bad days, and then it's about how quickly you can recover and improve that. So we'll look at the right technology to say what's the stuff that you invest in, so that you ultimately make it a better process within the infrastructure that we have and what we're able to do. I'm going to ask Vincent to specifically pick up the point on cargo and the other points that you made on the region.
The transit stuff.
Yeah, the transit stuff. Yeah.
Well, just to deal with the first question you asked, which is in relation to the car park site, that site was available for sale as a piece of land, so no restriction on usage. Clearly, if the DAA acquire it, we intend to make it available or to retain it available for car parking. In relation to cargo and Senator, here, perhaps unusually from a DAA point of view, you're facing two people from Limerick and one from Cork, so we're pretty familiar with the.
That's my point. You've had to come to Dublin for a job.
with the regional context.
I'm trying to make it easier for the next wave that doesn't happen.
Committee meeting in Limerick, but
I think the challenge when you refer to it and probably didn't intend to use the term force people to use or direct them. Nobody directs a user to Dublin Airport. Indeed, we have no contract with any airline to provide a service beyond today if they are operating it. They can choose to withdraw that service at any point in time if the route economics, if it's a passenger, or the cargo economics, if it's a cargo operation or whatever, do not stack up. It's absolutely the most mobile customer that one could have. Probably we are akin to a hotel. We're open. You can come and stay if you wish, but we can't.
The critical mass and the dominance always draws more. So if and I'm trying to be helpful, I suppose, from an overall perspective, because what we're trying to do is look at policy generally and try to take a slightly different direction in an effort to secure the future of the regions and recognising the population is growing. And to do that, you do have to intervene. And maybe my language in terms of forcing was maybe a bit OTT, but the point I'm making is we've got to sow some seeds that takes us in a different direction. That's where we're trying to get to.
And I guess this is where thinking through these in a policy context is important because, for example, if you talk about, you mentioned transit operations.
Yeah.
Transit operations typically operate at an airport where they have other activities that they can leverage the use of the same resources because by definition that airline can choose to conduct that activity in multiple places. So they will typically choose where they're already doing work, have a team based. If that moves to somewhere else, it may be completely outside of the country. Cargo tends to be located where the cargo is and the activity is. So clearly the economies of scale of Dublin are what one is competing with here as opposed to the economies of scale of Dublin Airport and any other area or region in the country that makes itself attractive for that business has the opportunity to bid for it. But I think we need to move away from any sense of, within a highly competitive industry, of directing things, because what we may end up is directing them out of the country completely as opposed to within the country.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Thanks very much for your...
Julie, and I don't doubt that Deputy Kerry may continue some of the line at that question. So go ahead, Deputy Kerry. You've got 12 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I just want to welcome our witnesses here today. Congratulations, Mr. Jacob, on your appointment. I wish you well in that. I suppose we as a committee we're trying to have a say in the framework of aviation policy going forward. And we've met a number of witnesses. We've met Ryanair, Aer Lingus, yourselves, members of the committee travelled to Holland and looked at Amsterdam, Schiphol Airport and Rotterdam. And I suppose the point that we're coming from is that we've a very imbalanced national aviation cake, and we're trying to address that problem. And there's opportunities for both Dublin and other airports within that. But it's the absolute dominance of Dublin. 90-odd% of all passenger traffic goes into Dublin. And that has a knock-on impact. It's like Dublin, the capital, is overheating, huge pressure on housing, schools, whatever services, infrastructure. And we're trying to see if this could be done differently. There's plenty of spare capacity in other airports, including your own airport in Cork, Shannon. And there's an opportunity there, and even, Senator Dooley touched on that point in terms of trying to maybe work together as a country, your state, semi-state agency. What's in the best interest of the country going forward? Is it healthy to have basically 92 or 3% of all traffic going into Dublin and the impact of that? And you're pulling so many people from Clare to Dublin to fly out and bypassing Shannon Airport. And it's just really the aggressive, you're only a new man in the job, but even when the Ryder Cup was announced for Adair Manor a number of years ago, like the first thing done by Dublin was, welcomed it and said, flying through your local airport in Dublin. And there's constant aggressive marketing, whether it's on local radio or on the newspapers or whatever, in the west of Ireland, encouraging people to go to Dublin to fly. And notwithstanding that, we do need a really well-run airport in our capital city. There's no doubt about that. But for me and for a lot of people, the mask slipped in terms of Dublin and the pressure that's there, the amount of people queuing out in the rain. We had several hearings here. And basically, it really dawned how many people are travelling to Dublin and your ability to cope with that. And, it's timely that we are having these hearings because this aviation policy is being reviewed. But really, that question is, do you hope to, what's your idea of aviation policy? Do you want Dublin to grow even more? You have 33 million passengers in 19. Do you want to double that? Do you want to go bigger? What do you want to do? Have you any other regard for the rest of, say, our country's airports and the role that they have?
Thanks for the question. Look, there's a lot there. National aviation policy, we absolutely need one. I think every airport, every airline would say we need one. We haven't had one for a while, and we should have one, and there should be lots of inputs into that conversation. I think that should touch on connectivity into Ireland, connectivity into the regions. What do we want it to look at? I think it should cover resilience, and that's something that wouldn't have been there in the past. But learning from COVID, learning from the economic situation, it needs to cover resilience, that no airport has the issues that we had. And we've said mea culpa, and we've worked to improve that. We have improved that, but we'll never take anything for granted. We'll never be complacent when it comes to the operating standards at our airports going forward. It absolutely needs to cover sustainability in a way that it wouldn't have covered in the past. So I'm just calling out the key things that need to be in that. It needs to allow us to attract airlines that they want to come and fly here, and it needs to cover infrastructure. It's Dublin versus the big hubs, as I've said, and I know this from the airline point of view. Airlines don't look at it and say, I'll just move that Dublin-Hania route, that Dublin-Malaga route to Cork or Shannon instead, and people will do it. Airline economics work on the basis of, will I fill that plane? Will I get the fare that I want? And they will look at that from moving a route between Cork and Shannon, between Kerry and Knock. That's the way it works in the region. So there's loads of competition. We welcome competition. I think it's competition amongst the regional airports, and then it's Dublin competing with the hubs. Look, as Vincent said, you have two people from Limerick and one person from Cork here, so we get it. A lot of people would say, is there imbalance on everything, and is there a Dublin bias? It's a reality when it comes to airports. As Vincent said, it's a hotel. The airlines are the ones who decide where they want to fly from. And do they want to come and use Dublin Airport, Cork Airport, or any airport around the country? So I think that question is one for them. Our job is to remain highly competitive on price, give a good service to the airline customers who come through, and give a good service to the passengers who use the airport. And a liberalised, openly competitive market is the right thing that we need. So I don't think there's an imbalance. I think we want to keep it an open market. The regions will compete with them. The regions will compete with themselves. Dublin Airport is a different thing, and it absolutely is competing with other airports like Schiphol that you mentioned. Rotterdam is different. It's more like Cork, and would love to be in a healthy competition. I think Dublin will do plenty of things in the years ahead better than Schiphol Airport does. I would love the connectivity that Schiphol has to downtown Amsterdam. Because you can land, you might have a long walk to get through immigration, but you then just jump on public transport down to downtown Amsterdam, and that's something that we don't have. So those things in the wider system, we absolutely need to look at. Dublin Airport aggressive marketing, I didn't hear any, or I didn't see any. Generally, airports don't need to do too much marketing, but I'll ask Vincent to.
Steady on,
I might be reading.
Go to your marketing department.
I might be reading the wrong newspapers. You might be giving me ideas.
You were going well there now.
But look, marketing might be part and parcel, and Vince can add a bit more colour. I'm going to ask him just to give his views on what should be in national aviation policy, and also Catherine can give you her view.
Yeah, look, I think Kenny has covered a number of things from a policy point of view, but maybe coming back to a question about capacity, which was raised. One of the things we have within our regulatory system is a very much a just-in-time model for remuneration. So there's a prize on saying you don't have capacity in any time ahead of what you need it. In fact, you're penalised for it. And a classic example of that is that 10 years after Terminal 2 was opened, the last one-third of it was remunerated for the first time, because in the decision of the regulator at the time, T2 was too big. Now, I think when we look at airport infrastructure, there are lots of different components, and it's a bit of a jigsaw. You have a runway, that adds runway capacity, but it doesn't add terminal capacity. So our job is to keep providing this infrastructure in anticipation of the demand of the economy, the demand of the public, the demand of tourism, etc. But what we haven't had at a policy level for any of our airports is that question as to whether we should have more capacity than we need today, but comfortable for the next 10 years ahead, or just enough capacity in 10 years from now as we might need then, which is where we're at the moment.
Is your capacity defined at the moment?
Sorry?
What is your capacity?
It's very difficult to define capacity in any single block because of all of the different components, and you can be over the requirement in some areas and yet constrained in others, which becomes the limiting factor. Until we built the runway, our limiting factor was the number of aircraft that could take off, particularly in peak times in the day. That issue is resolved, but it creates a different bottleneck and a different sizing of capacity. So it's not a straightforward answer to give, and I think in a policy context we can approach it in a lot more complex way. Just to give you a context, we are very proud to serve the whole of Ireland. In fact, the whole island of Ireland. For example, more people visit Northern Ireland from outside of the UK through Dublin Airport than any of their local airports, and that's because we have the sort of long haul and connectivity to destinations around the world that make us a much more attractive option in Dublin Airport than transferring, for example, through Heathrow. However, I would say that it might surprise people that from the residents that use Dublin Airport, 70% of our business comes from people who live in Leinster. So, in terms of the core catchment, we are fulfilling their needs, and we are fulfilling the need of a capital city airport for the rest of the country. And clearly, if one wants to get a direct flight from Ireland, a country, an island with 6.5 million people, to somewhere like Dubai or Hong Kong, you would not expect in a country like that to get that from multiple destinations. So I think we are proud and will absolutely promote and make people aware of our route network. If that comes across as aggressive marketing, that's not our intention, but it is certainly creating the awareness of the services that are available in the context of the discussions that we've had before about mobility. It is important that we advertise to people how to get to Dublin Airport. I know that there have been comments in the past about promoting bus services from parts of the country to the airport. One of the ways that we stop people driving cars is by creating awareness and usage of the bus services. So we wouldn't necessarily apologise for any of that type of promotion and awareness, but as I said, we're operating with a core catchment and then a reach into the rest of the country, which increasingly is more for the sort of services that are available in the capital city airport only, and You know, we wish every airport, obviously including Cork Airport, well in terms of building its regional structure from its own catchment.
Our next contributor is Deputy James O'Connor. You've got 12 minutes. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chairperson. I wish you well in your role. Just want to congratulate Mr. Jacobs as well on your new position. I really do wish you well. And just to start in a couple of positives, I think it's great to see the new runway in Dublin Airport's operating. And I think it's going to make a huge impact and it's going to be very positive. We're very happy with our new runway in Cork as well. I know that Neil and all of the gang at the airport there, they've been doing a superb job. And they've been excellent, and the service out of the airport as well has been very good. And it's good to see, you know, even from a demand point of view, the strength of the recovery in the numbers in Cork is very, very significant. You know, that's not to be missed, and it was very, very good news as well. So that's down to good management and people wanting to use the service and good marketing as well. So as a Corkman, I'm happy in that that respect. Look, I suppose just with Dalton's departure. I know we had difficulties around the situation in the summer, but I think he's a good man, and I just want to wish him well. And I think he had a vision from a capital development point of view with the airport that I thought, you know, he was quite a forward-thinking individual. Obviously, COVID caused enormous difficulties for aviation, which we've teased out here. But I do want to say I have a couple of concerns. You know, I've been on record with my unhappiness around Terminal 1. I'm a very regular user of Dublin Airport, just primarily because of the fact that, you know, if we are flying midweek here from Minster House, or if we're travelling for business or whatever, that it is obviously close by. Often that's the Ryanair flights out of Terminal 1, and I just don't think for the country that Ireland is, and how developed of an economy we have, the success story of the Irish economy, the success of aviation. You know, all throughout the capital city today, there are thousands of people after flying in for the aviation conference. We are a global hub and a global player. But Terminal 1 doesn't reflect that. And I really, really would encourage you, Mr. Jacobs, and I'll just ask you in a moment to deal with that situation as a new incoming CEO. The reality is, when it comes to the development of a major piece of terminal infrastructure, Mr. Harrison, I don't think, if I stand corrected, I think it's going to be 2029 before we see infrastructure come in line at the airport in terms of new terminal infrastructure. And I just want to ask the first question. What's your view on the €100 million underground tunnel at the airport?
A few bits there. On the tunnel, which we've talked about briefly, and I'm going to ask Vincent to add more. On the tunnel, look, the regulator wants us to do the tunnel from a safety point of view. That's absolutely massively important. The tunnel is part of a 1.9 billion capital investment programme over the next number of years. So I don't want it to become something that is the be-all and end-all. It's part of a big programme that we have. We're good at infrastructure. Airlines are good at buying aircraft. They're good at buying fuel at the right time. We're good at doing infrastructure. I think the North Runway is a really good example of good forward planning in Ireland. Of that's how you do it. It came in ahead of time and under budget. With the tunnel, regulator wants us to do it for safety reasons. We have customers who want us to do it because it'll improve efficiency at the airport for cargo operators, but also for commercial airlines operating at the airport. So we want to go ahead and do the tunnel at the right time because we think it's required, and Vincent can add a bit more on that. On T1 and Cork, Cork is great. When I worked on the airline side, it didn't have the growth that it has at the moment. It's got a good growth deal at the moment. I was in there last week. It's fantastic. The only thing that goes wrong in Cork is the wind, which Neil and the team can't control. But it's a very, very efficient airport. Everything works well there. Everybody in Cork is happy. Obviously, I'm happy because I'm from Cork, and I love getting messages from friends and family saying Cork Airport was a dream today. So I think for business travel, for families heading away, you know, we've added Valencia, Ryanair have added Valencia, Seville, La Rochelle as great destinations, and they're great summer destinations, and I think that's fantastic. So long may that continue in Cork, and that the wind doesn't become a problem on any given day. On T1, I want T1 to be better. I probably was its most frequent customer for 5 years of my life, and trust me, I have a long list of things from stuff to take down, stuff to declutter, specific toilets that I want to have fixed. There's an infrastructure bit, and I'm not in any way giving anybody a kick-to-touch answer that infrastructure will solve and make T1 better. What makes T1 better is the management team going up there every day like it's a big show. Every airport should be a fast and friendly flight factory. And I don't mind using that language. It's about getting through efficiency at security, that it takes less than 20 minutes. Ultimately, in a few years' time, I'd love to change that 20-minute target downward. I'd like every single toilet to be clean and never have issues in the toilet. If you be able to get a coffee, get a drink, whatever you want, be able to get a seat. It's that daily grind of running a big operation. T1 is compromised from, look, it's a very old building, so it's never going to look like an airport that you'd see in other parts of the world. And it's the airport it's the terminal that Ryanair operate out of, and they want to grow. Our job is to work with them so they can continue to grow, but that we make it a friendly and fast customer experience with all the difficulties around that. But I think we know, and we're getting on with fixing that. We took down the tents and the barriers associated with the queues last summer. We didn't need them over the course of the summer, but they were a visual reminder. So at the weekend, we took those away. And staff were really happy with that. We took down all the COVID signage because you didn't need to see that as you came back into immigration, and there are things that we've worked on already. We've changed our toilet supplier. This is boring stuff, but running and improving.
It does make a difference.
It does. It all makes a difference. It makes a difference to our staff who've done a great job. It makes a difference to us as the management team, and it makes a difference to the most important stakeholder, which is the passenger who goes through either T1 or T2.
Yeah. And just interrupt you because obviously I've a limited time slot. Yeah. There's a couple of things, like I find I just can't recall the name of the pier, but the farthest pier away, there's been quite a lot of, is it Pier D, is it? Or is, yeah. Is it, no, this now is Terminal 1.
Pier 1.
Like, from the point of view of even the availability of teas and coffees, if you're further down, catering, whether it's a bit of duty free, there's just very little life down there. I find that. Look, I think it's just something that would make an awful difference with minimal investment. I do find the area around the check-in it's very cluttered. Just the way you go into the building, that would be great to fix. I think from a sanitary point of view, that was another a lot of concerns were raised to me around that as well. And you've stated there you changed your toilet provider. That's great. But like particularly then you go over into the terminal side, like in the morning once you go through the security and peak hours, and once you go through security and you're effectively into the I suppose the departure area of the airport. I just that corridor leading down to the was there where the Starbucks is. It's Jesus, it's not good. Like it's very uncomfortable, and even I found. It was sad to see, but there was a lot of older customers there. One experience I had before Christmas where they were struggling after coming through security, and then you're into literally a blaze of people on that corridor leading down. I just think that that would make the world of a difference. That once you go over, if there was additional space created for retail, for catering. That it would, for minimal investment, you're going to get a lot more of a return for the customer, and that's something I would appeal. And I know Mr. Harrison has spoken to you about this before, and just under new leadership, that's something to look at. I just suppose in terms of the regulatory regime, I suppose which was in place since 2001, it's been effectively, I suppose it's been the system that's controlled the prices at Dublin Airport. And arguably, the airlines would say potentially it could have benefited the airport more so than the state. But I just want to get your insight in terms of what the review has published. What are the views of the DAA in terms of its outcome from delivering that infrastructure? As I said, it's going to be potentially the end of this decade before we're going to see any hard concrete being poured or in action. In terms of new infrastructure at the airport for additional capacity. What does that review outcome mean? And just also, could you reflect on the growth in numbers? So Dublin Airport obviously has not reached its 2019 passenger level quite yet. At that level, it was slightly over the recommended operating capacity at the airport. What's the DAA's interim plan to deal with that additional capacity that may come down the line? Perhaps by next year we'll return to the 2019 levels, hopefully. And once you go beyond 2024, what do you see the airport looking like when you could have potentially 7 or 8 million more passengers by the end of the decade in an airport that's built for around 30 million of an operating capacity? So just could you give me an insight into that? Because I think that's quite serious. We don't want to revisit what happened last year, but I'd have strong concerns there.
Okay, on the second one of those, so the regulatory regime and what does the airport look like at the end of the decade, I'm going to ask Vincent to cover that. On specifically, before I do that, on Pier 1 in Terminal 1. We walked it last week together, and we have a long list in terms of the things you called out. Teas and coffees in the summer peak at the far end of that terminal. So you've gone right after Starbucks, and you've done the walkways, and you're down, we say, at gate 116 at the end of Pier 1 in Terminal 1. That's an area, and specifically getting a tea or a coffee in the peak of the summer months. There might be permanent cafes that we'll always look at in terms of where they go in this permanent space, but we are looking at how do you provide those facilities on what I've called the big cup final days, when you have the big exodus out of Ireland, which are fairly predictable days. So teas and coffees at that, that's a good idea. We have the same idea, and we're looking at that. Check-in T1. We, and this means Ryanair, would not want you to have to do check-in. I think they're looking at the bag drop in all their airports, including Dublin Airport and including T1, obviously. But that's something that we would like to be able to go straight to security or straight through fast track without having to do check-in. But making that whole check-in process, if it's a family with big bags that have to be check-in, just making that smoother and that taking away, we'll say, the big density of people that's there. I know they're looking at a number of initiatives. That's good. We'll look at that as well. And on Starbucks that you mentioned, yeah, it does get tight there. If it's a Good Friday morning and you have lots of families, you have lots of parents with buggies, it does narrow there. That's one of the things that we've identified. How do we just free that up as much as we can, not making it a big year-long project. We actually will think, Good Friday morning, what can we do to declutter and just make it really, really easier when you've got a big throng of people going through. This is the daily grind, and on those big cup final days, we're looking at those three things that you mentioned. I'm now going to ask Vincent to cover the regulatory regime and what we think the airport will look like, needs to look like at the end of the decade.
Thank you.
Okay, just in relation to the regulatory regime, and as you said, Deputy, it's been in place for 20 years. I think it's pursued a relentless purpose, which is the lowest airport charge at Dublin Airport by any comparison. In fact, that's pretty much what the legislation says it has to do. I have some hope that with the new legislation and the amalgamation of other regulatory requirements or processes within the same body, that perhaps a more balanced view of the entirety of aviation might emerge from that body, but that's yet to be seen because that merger hasn't taken place yet. That's perhaps looking in hope into the future. But I think one of the things, and I've mentioned previously, there is not an incentive built into the system to have infrastructure before you need it. In fact, there's a penalty for doing it, in terms of reducing your pricing. That makes it quite difficult to both meet current requirements and build. And in a busy airport, when you're building, inevitably you're taking away some capacity to build on it while you're providing for the long term. We have a very significant construction plan ahead of us. When you use dates like 2029, we're talking about the end of the process for all of the construction, as opposed to nothing will be delivered within that time. We can clearly take the committee through the graduated phasing of delivery of infrastructure in some other process. But there have been a number of invitations as to what could be done, either in terms of policy context or otherwise by the committee. There are two things that create a difficulty for us. One is, as I said, that regime in terms of funding capacity, and coming back to one of the points that Catherine made about our lending capacity, our credit rating. What we say to a lender is we will not damage our credit rating, so therefore, if there's any possibility that we will do that, of course we will defer the investment and not strain our balance sheet. That doesn't make the capacity get delivered any further, but it does make us capable of maintaining the financial integrity of the country. That is an inbuilt compromise that is in the existing system that could be amended with a different, more assertive funding mechanism in place. The second thing is planning. And it won't surprise anybody in the committee here that all of these large infrastructure projects have yet to go through planning processes, have yet to go through on-board Panola appeals, etc., and will do. And I think a concern that I would have, and one that I would share among infrastructure providers, housing is absolutely fundamentally needed in Ireland. There is no doubt about that. But we need infrastructure in the economy as well. And I would just suggest that as we pressurise the planning system to provide more houses, we pressurise them and equip them to provide infrastructure as well. Because ultimately, having all the people that are housed appropriately but not able to access public transport or airport infrastructure, etc., will not be an optimal solution either. So that is one area that I think we would absolutely like the committee to carry the flag on, which is in terms of enabling us, to have a plan in place to build that infrastructure, to provide it gradually, and there are probably too many components of the jigsaw to just outline them here as to what that will precisely look like.
And Chairman, perhaps it might be beneficial to the committee at some point to come up, and if you could do a briefing for us on that, it would be a great idea.
Your contribution. Thank you very much. Our next contributor is Deputy Duncan Smith. You've got 12 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. I welcome Ms Gubbins, Mr Jacobs, Mr Harrison to the committee, and congratulations, Mr Jacobs, on your appointment. It's great to have the role filled and a direction going forward. I just want to pick up on the capital investment. There's a couple of areas I want to touch on and expand on. Just on the capital investment side of things. I mean, for those of us who are more familiar with Dublin Airport and have been given detailed briefings, we know how important this capital infrastructure is. We know it needs to be funded. It's all very unsexy stuff, but it is the reality in terms of delivering a top-class international airport. We had a committee meeting here before Christmas with Michael Leary from Ryanair and Eddie Wilson, and it was a very entertaining meeting. It was full of colour. We absolutely was lashing the tunnel out of it in particular, But I think we've heard as a committee today, and anyone watching, how succinctly and clearly it has been communicated by DAA why it's important. It is condition of the regulator. It is safety. No one wants to spend 200 million on a tunnel for no reason. There's no vanity in it. It is something that needs to be provided and needs to be funded accordingly. And it doesn't look as attractive as $9.99 for a flight to X, Y, and Z on an ad, but it is very, very important because those flights can't happen unless we have a safe airport that is well and strategically funded. I'll come back on the aviation the car pricing decision. I just want to talk about the flight deviations first without going over too much of the ground that's been covered already. Well, look, we've residents from St Margaret's in the ward, Ballybockle, Rosetown, Kilsallaghan, who are up in arms over what's happened over the last couple of months and will continue to happen until at least the 26th of February. There's a request from those residents to come in and address the committee. I think we should allow that. There's a precedent for it in 2003, and I think as a committee we probably don't hear from impacted citizens enough on whatever the issue may be, and I think that's something that we should respond to in the positive. But just on the flight deviations, when did the DAA find out or have noticed that these flights were going to deviate in such a way? Was it the morning of the first flights out that they went in that right direction across those areas, or did you have a week's notice or a month's notice, or when do you know that those flights are going to take that deviation?
Yeah, the runway went live on Wednesday, the 22nd of August, I'm pretty sure, and the first, I suppose, notification I got around it was on the Friday, the 24th, because at that point, I suppose, we had a number of flights taking off and there was a pattern. So when we saw that pattern, when it was different to what we had anticipated, then we started to engage on it.
How did you feel when you saw that, though? I mean, because I was at all those public consultations, or the vast majority of them. We were intimately familiar with the noise contours, and they basically went east to west with the waves either side. They did not go that way. So would you accept now that there's a huge breach of trust with the residents? It's going to be very hard to repair with those communities because of what's happened here.
Absolutely, and we have acknowledged, that it was unexpected. We were disappointed to see it ourselves. We absolutely needed to start a process of engagement internally and externally with the various parties who are, responsible with us for this to understand how it had happened. And, that did involve us going back through the various engagements that had been held and understanding what had happened in 2016 and in the the intervening 6 years up until the actual runway went live. So, fully accept. And I suppose, with regard to a potential breach of trust, I suppose what I would say is we immediately started a process of engagement with the relevant community groups and indeed local councillors and representatives, because we were aware that, I suppose, communicating, letting people know what our position was and our understanding of that position at all periods that was appropriate, I suppose, from that point up until now. That was how we've tried to address that concern that's out there in the neighbourhood and to address that breach of trust.
I think one of the big issues I had was the Air Noise Competence Authority being so closely linked to Fingal County Council, and DAA being such high ratepayers of Fingal County Council. So there was always this concern that the parties were too close from a regulatory point of view, for a regulatory function. And the first thing out of the gate or out of the runway was this, which has just crippled trust now, unfortunately, which will take a long time to repair, if it can be repaired at all, I think, with the communities.
And I would call out, and again, this whole process is very complex, but I would call out that Fingal or ANCA are not involved in any way in the determination of flight paths, or not involved. They don't have any involvement in this issue.
But in terms of the air noise that has now impacted these residents, they go then to ANCA, to their local councillors, who are getting huge pressure now, and they're saying, look, it's not our problem. The DAA are saying, we didn't know until the first flight took off. The IAA are kind of wiping their hands of it, and everyone's just throwing their hands up in the air going, how can you possibly plan a runway that costs so much and has so much public consultation that on the morning of the first flights going out, that you don't know that the flights are going to take a right turn the way they did? That's just... It's huge anger out there, and there's a big meeting tomorrow night about it, and I hope that over the course of the next few weeks we'll have further clarification and that we can start to rebuild trust. But there's an awful lot of understandable anger out there. If I could just move to the pricing, your line in point 11. The regulators disallowed the recruitment of up to 240 of the security staff needed at Dublin by 2026. Because of its decision on its pricing, I'm very clear. I understand the pricing. I'm not. We have to pull the prices down. I know that there's no link really, as you outlined, with the price of flights. We need to fund and be able to invest in our airports. But this is quite. This is the standout line in your whole submission contribution, is that you are now saying that 240 staff can't be hired because of this pricing decision. You're saying that clearly.
I'm not saying that.
No.
What I'm saying is, and the 240 is the difference between 1,000 and 750 over the years 2023 to 2026. They're modelling, and again, I want to reiterate. Look, we don't have an issue with independent regulation. The inputs that they use for the modelling process and the data that they use and where that data is from, and is that data considering COVID, considering resilience? That's a question that we have. So over 20...
Sorry, is this what you mean by, in point 16, we need a reset in capital letters?
That's what I mean by we need a reset. And we're just taking two cost lines. If I just take that one cost line, so security staff, their model is saying for 2023 to 2026, the Dublin Airport should have 750 staff at security. That doesn't take into account COVID, and if anything like that happened again and you didn't have staff at security because they got COVID, as you had in every business and every organisation around the country. It doesn't take into account C3 scanners, which are a totally different piece of technology, and it doesn't take into account resilience. Just having a buffer so that, even forget about COVID, just the things that happen in big organisations and just happen in life, that we have that resilience built in. So our model says we need 1,000. They say our model is you need 750, and it leaves out a load of the things that have happened in the past 2 years. That's what we mean by the difference.
Okay, that's good. So you need 1,000. So you're going to have to deliver 1,000 either way, I imagine.
Yeah.
So you have to get that fund. So something else is going to suffer.
So then you're into running the business, the choices that you make, and do we want to compromise security? Absolutely not. So do we want to plough on and have 1,000 people so that we have over 90% going through in 20 minutes or less? Yeah, that's what we want. Do we want to compromise standards elsewhere because we're pulling staff from other parts of the operation into security? No, we don't want to do that. So we want to have the right level of security. We want the resilience around that. We want to have the right level of standards across the airport. And what we're saying in our statement is we need to have a reset in how the regulatory price is set, because the inputs used in their modelling don't reflect the reality of the past 2 years and the level of service that this committee, that the Taoiseach, that everybody wants in the coming years.
The figures that are used, we're talking, I think the average 759. Is that like what's the difference in figures in terms of per flight or whatever, or per passenger that you're talking about between what you need to deliver what you need and what has been agreed by CAR?
So the difference isn't related to the, I mean, look, yes, it will be related to the number of flights, the number of people that will go through it. They won't have anything included for resilience. So just in terms of if you have absenteeism, if you have issues with retention.
So they're not even including that.
So they're not including anything, and what we would now consider, I would call this the new reality of flying. And look, every airport, every country, every airline is saying resilience is going to be a challenge. So there needs to be an increase put in for resilience. There needs to be an increase put in for the extra staff that we know we need to operate the C3 scanners that we need, and the growth that we want to have in the number of flights. So that's the difference between the two numbers.
So you having to put in plans now for this yourselves now?
Look, the immediate focus is the summer. So we want to get through the summer, and we want to have no issues in the summer. Operating standards to be where we expect them to be, and the public want them to be, and that security takes the 20 minutes. It doesn't take more, and that's what we'd like to happen. So we'll get through the summer first, and we'll do what we need to do, and we still have more things to do. So that's where our immediate focus is. That's where my number one priority is making sure that Dublin Airport is the right experience for customers going through this summer.
Brilliant. In the 2 minutes we've left, can you speak to the single European sky, something that previous IATA spoken about, Ryanair spoke about when they were in, you spoke about, everyone seems to be pushing in the same direction here. Where do we need to lever on it as politicians? What needs to be done, and what are the blockages to having a single European sky?
So look, this can happen very, very quickly. It needs to happen at a Brussels level, and it needs to be that if overflights are allowed. So look, what usually happens is French air traffic control, Catalonian air traffic control in certain parts of Germany, they have staffing issues, they have regular strikes, and that results in everybody having to deviate their flight paths. That means if you're flying Dublin-Faro on your holidays, the plane has to take a longer route to get there. So that's how it works. I think what we would ask the committee is to put pressure that there is a conversation, and a real conversation, but every airline will say the same, IATA will say the same, so that there is a conversation in Brussels that this can happen and that overflights are allowed. Overflights would mean that if there is air traffic control restrictions in France, that because they have an air traffic control strike, that's a domestic issue within France. But if you're flying from Dublin to Northern Italy on your holidays, that overflights are allowed, and that you can go through French airspace without being disrupted.
So where is the political energy on this? Is there political energy on this, or are France blocking this? Is this a conversation that's happening at the moment actively, or is this just a call from the industry that's kind of not being listened to at the moment?
It's being listened to. It could be listened more to. And look, I worked in an airline, and 10 years ago would have been calling for restrictions on air traffic control and to allow overflights, but 10 years later it's still happening. So I think everybody involved in aviation is fed up, and is right to be fed up with this. And we would like greater pressure that there is a single European view taken on this to say, okay, if French air traffic controllers go on strike, if regional German air traffic controllers have staffing issues, that then impacts their domestic market. It shouldn't impact people flying from Dublin over France on their way to Italy on their holidays. That's something that can be fixed. There's nothing technical getting in the way. There's nothing safety related to this. This is something that can be decided. There'll obviously be some political resistance. So the support that we would...
relations resistance to it in those states?
There is resistance to it in the state, because I think they will view it as, okay, this is interference at a European level in terms of how they run their aviation. So I think that's the barrier that's there. But look, airlines manage around it, airports manage around it. We don't want any one of our passengers to be on the tarmac on a Ryanair flight or an Aer Lingus flight this summer waiting to get to Italy on the holidays because the flight is delayed because there's restrictions on airspace because of air traffic control strikes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jacobs, our next contributor is Deputy Cathal Crowe. You've got 12 minutes. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chairman. I just want to welcome everyone from Dublin Airport Authority in here this afternoon. I've been following a lot of the debate from my office, and yet I've been over in the chamber, so apologies if I touch on questions that may have been asked or asked in a different way so far. Look, from the outset, welcome and congratulations, Mr. Jacobs, and best of luck with the new role. Your predecessor, and this isn't personal about him, this is Dublin Airport Authority Inc., have had a lot of success in recent years, but I would describe the relationship towards Shannon as predatory. And I'm a TD from County Clare. And we recognise it is the national airport. It has a position of dominance. But sometimes a position of dominance is what it is, and it's used at times to subvert, I would say, Shannon, and there has been aggressive marketing on the doorstep of our airport. Indeed, the poaching of passengers by bus, and I heard Mr. Harrison's explanation that it gets people out of cars, and it does, but there's another motive as well. It drives passengers through your terminal, and that's the real aim of that. Look, I'd like to know as a group, because we're looking at a national aviation policy. We want you to grow, flourish, but we also want to protect our other airports, particularly on the west of the island, and to ensure that they also grow and are on a growth trajectory in the coming years. It's not all for you to solve, it's more for us to solve, but can you tell us something about your stewardship, your terminal stewardship, how you will be towards your counterparts in Shannon, including Mary Constantine?
Ryanair and I wish her absolutely the best, and the team at Shannon the best. We operate Dublin and Cork Airport, so that's really what we want to talk about, and what I think we've been asked here to talk about today. To say a few other things. Look, I'd absolutely love Cork and Shannon to be competing. I know myself, having worked in the airline side, that's where the competition exists. So Cork, Shannon, Knock, Kerry, they always compete heavily, and airlines view it that way as well. I don't really see it as a competition between Shannon and Dublin. Dublin's competition is airports like Manchester and Edinburgh, and definitely I'll be taking what Senator Dooley pointed out on the aggressive marketing. We will be applying that to Manchester and Edinburgh, because they have plans of doing transatlantic with CBP, and we will have that fierce competition with those other airports that we consider as a competitor to Dublin, who want to take some of our customers. We don't want that. We want people from the north of England, we want people from Scotland coming to Dublin, using it to fly transatlantic. That's a great product, and that's where we see our competition. We don't see it as with the regional airports. But from a core perspective, there will be competition between Cork and Shannon, and that should continue.
Okay. The next one to ask you, we visited a number of airports in the Netherlands. I'm sure the members have told you. We were very impressed by Rotterdam Airport in particular, where they have really embraced the whole realm of sustainability. Down along the entire runway, there was a network of solar panels with anti-glare effect, which worked perfectly with landing and taking off aircraft. They also had a number of hangars in a development zone down the back of the airport, where they were trialling everything from battery-powered aircraft, solar-powered technology for aircraft, a whole range of stuff, and of course hydrogen, which everyone's talking about, and SAFs. Just wondering, where are you at in that space in terms of positioning yourselves at the top of Europe on that league table?
All of the things look, I think that's great. I haven't been in Rotterdam Airport for about 18 months. I think the Dutch have traditionally been leaders. We want Dublin and Cork Airport, and our plan is that we will be leaders in this space as well. Everything that you've listed out, from the solar panels to the battery-powered aircraft, hydrogen, we want these to be trials that exist at Dublin and Cork Airport as well in the coming years, and everything else that's listed in our statement. Only electric buses taking you from the car parks to the terminals, and everything else that's in our statement as part of our sustainability plan. We've reduced our own carbon by 26% while we've grown and added 14 million passengers. That's no mean feat. And we have a target that we get to that we are net carbon zero by the year 2050. So we've done a huge amount. This is one of the biggest challenges facing the industry. On sustainable aviation fuel, there isn't enough of it out there. That's what the airlines would say. I think Ryanair have a fantastic plan, and a big, brave plan, to get to 25% of their fleet using SAF by the year 2030. So we would welcome more SAF being used. We incentivise airlines that use sustainable aviation fuel, and that will continue, and we'll work with the airlines and the fuel providers to make sure that becomes something that becomes a bigger part of what we do at the airport. But the bigger issue there is just the production of sustainable aviation fuel.
Thank you. I next want to ask you a question about Alliance Aviation, who are an important customer of DAA. They bring a lot of private passengers, private aviation through the airport. I just want to put a scenario to you, because my understanding is since July of last year, non-commercial passenger traffic, including Alliance Aviation, when they land at the airport, they're directed over to the west apron. The passengers then disembark and they're transported by car or bus around the airport perimeter to get to the Platinum Lounge, which is a circuitous journey, takes about 20 minutes, and it's not really what the business passenger wants when they land in Ireland. It gives a fairly poor, I would say, first impression of Ireland when you arrive and you have to do this big lap around to get to the... I think that company, I think others in fact, have offered to develop facilities from their own coffers within the curtilage of the airport. Could you comment on that? Are you really meeting the benchmark of private jet aviation business travellers when you're making them make this big route around the outer perimeter of the airport?
Okay, thanks for that question. I'm going to ask Mr. Harrison to answer that one.
Thank you.
Well, I think
is it tunnel related, maybe?
Yeah, I think you've sold a business case there for one of the users in relation to the convenience aspect and efficiency of the tunnel operation. I would just say that the company that you mentioned are one of a number of providers of the service. They're located in a particular location, acquired that through a tender in terms of location at a hangar. Most of the private jet operations that are accommodated in Dublin Airport operate from the east side, so the same conditions don't necessarily apply in terms of exactly what you've described there. You know, we've ongoing discussions in relation to the plans and proposals that company has, so we engage with them. I think that one aspect that is very clear to all, we have an airport security regime which imposes particular restrictions on where passengers of any nature are processed at the airport, and that's one of the paramount considerations when we get into the detail of some of those proposals.
Okay, I note the new tunnel you're planning would cost 200 million. It's a lot. It's a big outlay of money, and if you've now, of course, this alone wouldn't solve it. But if you've companies like the one I just mentioned lining up with offers to develop their own facilities from their own finances, would that not be part of a solution that you should be entertaining at this time, rather than having them driving a loop of the airport perimeter? That they would have a facility across the airfield.
I think what I referred to in terms of the security regime, which is one that's governed not by ourselves but by the Department of Transport, national security policy and security regulators, are the bigger element of concern in relation to what you've described. Okay. I mean, I think from what you're describing is effectively processing passengers outside of the airport facilities, which is highly problematic from a security point of view.
Okay. Next, I want to ask about wage levels. I know a lot of colleagues have already asked about staffing and getting people through security. Where have you been at in terms of paying these people, or could you give us an indication as to where the lower paid, how their salaries have improved or remained static, if that might be the case since the onset of COVID?
I'd say two things. It continues to be a difficult labour market. November of last year, 98% of our unionised staff voted in favour for a pay deal. So I think that's all the indication that, you know, that's a very high percentage. I haven't seen as high a percentage in any other business in Ireland. So that's what I would say on that.
Okay. And do you think it's enough? It's not under any more reviews at the moment? It's
a tough labour market. Everybody is looking for staff that's involved in the aviation campus. So the handlers, the airlines, everybody's looking at that. Everyone's doing what you need to do. Everybody's spending money on overtime. So you always look at everything that's in the mix. It's how you train staff, how you manage them, that everybody's motivated and is well rewarded. I think 98% specifically of the unionised staff voting in favour of a pay deal as late as last November is an indication that we don't see pay as a barrier.
When we went to Holland as an Oireachtas Aviation Committee, or an Oireachtas Transport Committee, we often feel like an aviation committee. When we went to Holland to examine... When we went to Holland, we examined their national aviation policy, and one of the things we went to see was they cap the number of planes that come in and out of Schiphol. So that really enthused us because, there is that position of dominance that Dublin enjoy. And then you've Cork, Shannon in my own constituency, Knock, gravelling it out to get that other space. There's only about 9% or so of the market left for them to try to compete on. But when we went there, it wasn't actually a cap that we believed, I think in the first instance, it's more an environmental cap. And they made it very clear to us as we left Rotterdam Airport that this is coming down the line for all European airports. There will be environmental caps relating to fuel, nitrates directives, but also noise outputs of airports. And I think already Dublin's grappling with a bit of this with residents around St Margaret's and the Ward and areas like that. So they very much started working. Schiphol started working with other airports. They felt that their way of maintaining this position as the national airport of the Netherlands relied on giving a slice of the cake to the other airports, divvying it up a little bit more than they currently had. And now it's working a little bit better. It's not perfect, and I think we've learned a lot more about it in the last few weeks. So can I go back to that initial question of the likes of Shannon Airport, but also Cork and Knock? How can they help the overall national aviation picture when you're probably getting quite close to those upper limits that the European Commission will have?
Okay, so there's a few bits to that. I mean, again, I'll reiterate, Dublin's competing with Manchester, it's competing with Edinburgh, it's competing with the big international hubs. The regional airports in Ireland are more so competing with each other. I think just the geography of the Netherlands and the distance between Schiphol and Rotterdam is very different, we'll say, than travelling by road from Dublin to the other regional airports in Ireland. That's just one point I'd make. And look, Schiphol I know well, and there's a great story on all the things that you called out. I'd like to call out one thing that the Dutch, I don't think, are doing right, because there's lots of things that you've listed there on everything they're doing on sustainability. At the same time, the Dutch government are saying if you fly Dublin, Schiphol, Nice, which produces more carbon than you flying Dublin-Nice directly, they exclude the connecting flights from carbon emissions calculations. So there's a little bit of all the things that they're doing, which we're doing as well, but every flight should be taxed and there shouldn't be an exclusion for connecting flights, in my view. So not everything the Dutch do, I would want to say, and everything at Schiphol would be something that we want to do at Dublin. The geography of Schiphol and Rotterdam is not the same geography as Dublin to the regional airports, and our competition and the way the airlines view it, it's Dublin versus the international hubs, but absolutely Cork, Kerry, Shannon and Cork are competing with each other when it comes to flights, and that's the way the airlines would look at it as well, and they will continue to be part of that healthy competition.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lynn.
Okay. Jacob, thank you very much, Deputy Crowe. And despite being the chair, I don't actually get the perk of going first. I'm actually last today of the first round, so thank you all very much for being here, and I think we've covered a lot, but I think that there's just a few things I might go back on and equally touch on again. In terms of, I never appreciated a Good Friday was such a bad day to travel before now, and there's been about 10 or 15 references to it, so it was, for a long time we were trying to get the pubs open on Good Friday. Now it seems to be the day that you shouldn't go to the airport. And again, you touched on the point about, should 20 minutes really be, I suppose, the base? I mean, I would like to think that, and I've gone through Dublin Airport in less than 10 minutes, and I'd like to acknowledge that, and recently in December. But I think I would like to see more ambition than 20 minutes. It's great to have that as a start, but I would like to think that, you know, if you arrive at the airport, and particularly if you're a family with children going on a holiday or something, the idea of hanging around a queue for 20 minutes and nudging your way forward. And I think there were certainly points that Deputy Dooley made, or Senator Dooley made, about, you know, it's quite frustrating sometimes to be there in the queue and you're looking at people, there's only maybe room for 2 people, 3 people, they're a bit slow, and you want to get your belt off and you want to empty out your pockets and you want to do, and there's just nowhere in front of you to like the trays come back this far, you're over here, you can't get to the trays because they don't go around the corner. And I just wonder, is there a way of redesigning? And maybe there isn't, and maybe and this was T2, I think. And I'm also, don't think anyone's realised that you can actually go into T1 and walk across to T2, or go into T2 and walk across to T1 if you've realised that one is much faster or slower than the other on a given day. And maybe that's something you don't want the world to be that familiar with, but certainly I think it's worthwhile doing occasionally. Perhaps you might just touch on the level of interaction you have with, I'll give you a few points and you can come back on them, the interaction with the regulator, the points you're making to us about the regulator. Are you in a position, or is there a mechanism that you can actually say to the regulator, we're at a situation, I mean, I'm looking at the figures from Dublin Airport for 1998, it was 11 million, right up to 32 million, and we're then, obviously, 2020, the pandemic put a halt on all that. But, those growth figures are absolutely phenomenal, and absolute huge credit to initially Eoghan and subsequently the DAA and all of the people there, both in the airport, in the DAA itself, and indeed in all the airlines, because, you don't do the passengers without the airlines. And Mr. Jacobs, from being on the other side of that, it's a team effort on behalf of Team Ireland, the success of Dublin Airport. But is there a limit on the capacity for Dublin Airport Inc. at the moment? Is there a passenger cap within planning permission? Is it 32 million or 34 million? Or can you go to 60 million? Or what is the building capacity of the terminals and what's there now? I've sometimes have used those south gates in Terminal 2 and find them kind of frustrating, and you're praying that the plane turns left rather than right, and all of a sudden it's going right and it's 10 o'clock at night and you have to get back and get on a bus and be wheeled back. How are we going to, I suppose, future-proof the airport? Is there, within the entire regulatory mechanism, it seems to be that the better you perform, the less you can charge. And perversely, I suppose, the less well you perform profitably, the less money you made on retail, the less money you made on concessions, the less money you made on parking, the higher the passenger charge might be. The more money you make in all these things, the less the passenger charges. But it's almost a zero-sum game where you're not entitled under the mechanism to, there's no real reward for you being better than being better, because it just means you'll be able to charge the passengers less. And I think that's kind of a flaw in the legislation. I wonder, longer term, is there a need for a third terminal? Who do you think that should be run by yourselves? I presume you do. Or would there be an idea that someone else would run it? The new machines, we mentioned them, but we visited them when we were in Shannon back in May of last year, and they're much bigger, they're much more expensive, they're much heavier. They're wonderful, but can you fit as many machines of those in? I think you have to have them by 2025. How much will it improve your levels of efficiency? I'd be interested in the list of 18 airports that you're saying you're the cheapest of. Just, you can maybe circulate that to us afterwards. I'd also be interested in the one of the 159 infrastructure projects that wasn't agreed to. And then I suppose just in terms of capacity for additional airlines or airline services. So, I mean, I met a commercial manager of one of the airlines last summer just at a function, and he was saying, we do a second flight a day into Dublin, but we can't get the baggage handling, we can't get the check-in staff, we can't get the... And I accept that it's not your direct responsibility, but to a certain extent, everything that happens on your campus reflects on you, whether that's planes not being de-iced or bags getting lost. I know you're not directly responsible, but how do you make sure that your reputational damage or there's minimum reputational damage to you guys? How do you make sure that the people operating on your campus do what they do? And then longer term, I suppose, I was in Hamburg last year. It was an hour of 55 minutes getting through security. I was able to look and realise that the plane hadn't yet left Dublin, so we weren't going to get in trouble. But at the same time, I acknowledge that you're having a lot less problems than a lot of other places. I don't think any of us really touched on the fantastic... I think it should be acknowledged that the work that both DAA International does, and that all of your shopping, I was in an airport a long way from Dublin seeing advertising for the Loop and stuff, and realised, oh, this is a DAA managed operation. And I think we should acknowledge how much and how well Dublin Airport Authority Inc., separate from all the wonderful things that are happening both in Dublin and Cork, does in terms of airport management and indeed the management of airport retail. And then I suppose the last thing is really bus. I mean, I'm dropping two people to an air coach at 3:30 in the morning to get a flight at 6:30. And the connectivity, what do you do in terms of proactive, offering better services, more capacity for air coach, but everybody else as well, all the other private operators, Dublin Bus and so on. And equally, there seems to have been an issue around taxis, and if you have any time to develop, can taxis I know they have to pay, or there was a fee a year they had to pay, and how much they had to pay, and people can drop off but not pick up, and that just seems to me to be we're missing out on taxi capacity because people haven't paid this fee. Is there a better mechanism you could apply that allows them to pay per journey as opposed to per year, so that everybody can do it? And so that's a kind of a touching of, because I think almost every point that I would have liked to maybe touch on first has been touched on, but there's a lot in that. But go ahead. And obviously, congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you very much. I think there's 5 things there, so I'll just quickly outline those. First of all, on Oireachtas and DAA International, thank you for saying that. It's great. Look, we feel great pride when you go to different parts of the world and you see parts of the organisation. That's fantastic. I think that chimes with what I've said in terms of Ireland is just great at aviation. And we take great pride in that, and there are fantastic teams operating in Oireachtas International and DAA International. Secondly, on security, I'll touch on that, and I'll touch on the handlers that, you know, airlines saying we want to fly more, but we can't because we can't get the staff there. I'll handle that. I'll ask Catherine and Vincent to talk on the longer term stuff, and Vincent can also talk about buses and taxis. On security, look, we have an ambition for it to be better, to be faster than 20 minutes. We're not setting a target. At the moment, the regulator says anything beyond 30 minutes is a problem. We have an internal target of 20 minutes. Cork operates to the target of 15 minutes. Would we love to get there? We'd love to get there. We're not saying that's our new target or will be anytime soon. That comes down to what we're able to achieve on staffing and the use of technologies and everything else in the mix. The immediate focus is on staffing. And the immediate focus is getting from the 645 to north of 800 staff in time for the summer peak, so that we just get through the summer, and more importantly, our passengers get through the summer without any dramas at security. That's priority number 1, 2 and 3 between now and October. On the redesign and the pieces that you've called out, yeah, the new C3 scanners, they're bigger pieces of kit, they're heavier pieces of kit, they have a broader footprint. It's a better experience for customers.
Will you have less lanes?
You can have less lanes, you can reconfigure the lanes. We don't know fully yet. At the moment, look, we've just put a couple into T1 and T2 and we're trialling it, and we need
indeed, you might need as many lanes because they're faster or whatever.
Yeah, you might need a bigger footprint depending on what you want to do. So there's a redesigning piece that we're constantly looking at. The immediate focus is on the staffing levels all the way through to the summer, but the redesigning piece and that specific piece of kit that you called out, look,
and that's 2025, is it? The machines have to be in by?
Machines have to be in by 2020.
Sorry, it's not regulated.
It's not regulated.
Yet, it's not, we believe, you know, towards 2024.
We want to have them in place because it's a better experience for customers. Efficiency may not be better, may not be much better, right? So it's not really just about the throughput. It's better for safety, better customer experience.
The liquid limit is gone.
And the liquid limit is not related to that. So the liquid limit is gone, has changed from 75 to 100, but that's separate.
No, the 100 was always there, but I mean, is the 100 limit gone?
You don't have to take them out.
There's still a limit of 100, is it?
No.
With the new machines?
Currently, the limit remains on 100, but you don't have to take them out of the bag. Right. Okay. So, yeah, we'll look at the redesign piece. How do we make that better, safer, better for experience for customers, but better from a safety point of view in the round? So that's on security, but the main thing I would say there, it's just the main focus at the moment is staffing and getting through the summer. On airlines saying we want to fly another flight but we can't because of handlers, that's a contract between them and the handlers that they use. Of course, we will say we won't.
But you're losing out because they're not operating.
I think the system is losing out.
We're all losing out. But
we're all losing out. We're all losing out. So we would encourage active dialogue between the airlines and the handlers. We do get involved, and we will meet to make sure where handlers are at. Have they staffed up to the right levels for summer? We will have dialogue with the handlers and the airlines to make sure that they get.
Do you have a capacity constraint on the airport? I mean, is it 35? Is it 36? Is it 38? What's the limit?
Okay, so we're now on to the longer term piece. I'll ask Vincent and Catherine to kind of talk about the capacity, the limits around
Sorry
that.
to cut across you.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, there are planning restriction caps in place, and those are part of what we will address within our planning applications.
What's the limit? What is the capacity constraint?
There's currently, there's a planning limit that dates back to the planning permission for Terminal 2 of 32 million passengers at throughput at the airport.
And what happens if you go in excess of that? Or how do you legally get to a position where you can? Because obviously
by way of planning application and the associated infrastructure, and that's something that we're working on in terms of imminently producing that, and that to a certain extent had to take a backseat to the planning process around the runway, which has been preoccupying us for a number of years. You talked about interaction with the regulator. There is extensive interaction.
Okay.
There's a decision that takes up 250 pages. It replaced a draft decision of about 250 pages. There are thousands and thousands of pages of material.
So you're definitely talking to each other.
The problem with that tends to be there's a lot of discussion about detail and perhaps not not really cracking these kind of core policy points that we're talking about. At some levels, yes, you're right, it is a zero-sum game. In some quarters, that could be described as
you've no real
as a positive.
Not a lot of reward for you becoming more efficient or more revenue generating.
Let's put it like this: in looking at it positively, growth and a greater base to spread the costs on helps everybody, so there's a rising tide effect. And in theory, that should happen. That's one of the reasons why we are highly surprised that, let's say, in 2019, when there was a decision, and it was based on an upwardly moving profile and volumes were higher, was the reason why prices were
per passenger.
That was the overall dialogue. Because volumes are going to be higher, prices will come down. We now have a decision for 2023 where volumes are lower and prices are down further. So essentially on a like-for-like basis, and I think...
And a lot of your overheads have gone up. I mean, your ordinary overheads, your staff costs, your fuel costs, your electricity costs have all gone up.
The world is a more difficult place now than it was when we were at peak in 2019, even if we were innocent and we didn't realise what was coming around the corner. So I think we can forgive the process for considering a really rising tide in that. But when effectively the damage is compounded in 2023 is one of the reasons why I guess we have to translate our thousands of pages in submission into a simple statement in our opening submission that talks about it being inexplicable. The differences in terms of security numbers and some of these details, there are always arguments, but in summary terms, we are very uncomfortable with the long-term perspective in terms of how we can achieve the statutory responsibilities that we carry as a business. Just on connectivity, we are, as I said, in a variety of fora, we are really keen to promote all forms of connectivity to the airport, and obviously the more sustainable, the better. We are very keen proponents of the metro, but in advance of that, put a lot of an expectation in bus connects, particularly the corridors that relate to Dublin Airport, not just to meet the needs of passengers, but to meet the needs of the staff, 20,000 people who work on campus, most of them not for ourselves, but for others, many of whom live in Swords and surrounding areas and don't have off-peak public transport capability. Taxis, you've mentioned, taxis is a perennial issue. The primary problem, I would say from a Transport Committee point of view, is a lack of taxi drivers across the city and the country. Various things may be put in place to address that. We particularly get impacted by that at peak times, night times. If there's a concert on in town, very hard to get a taxi. Hard to explain that to an arriving passenger who expects them to be there. I would say that our recent experience and our experience over Christmas, when we know taxis were problematic, was we had 93% of passengers. In this case, same 93%, but in fact a taxi wait of less than 10 minutes. That is good, but we are aware that the nighttime availability can be impacted from other reasons.
That charging mechanism of taxis having to pay a fee to use the airport or pick up at the airport, is that a deterrent to...
It is part of the structure of managing the operation into something that can be managed through a system. What I would say is over the last year we have introduced incentive mechanisms entirely focused on that nighttime availability. If taxi drivers do pickups and they're all registered through our system of sufficient number at nighttime, their annual fees are entirely waived. in accordance to actually
that's
doing business at that time in the evening.
First thing I've heard that I had never heard of before today. But
and look, there are actually more permits in place now than there was pre-COVID, but again, we're talking about people, individual sole traders who are chasing business wherever they most can achieve it.
Okay, I'm not sure what points you haven't addressed. Or I mean, just the reference to. I'd be interested in, I don't know whether you can do it commercially or whatever, in terms of the breakdown of revenue and the breakdown of profitability. I mean, is the car parking incredibly profitable, or is it the retail, or is it the concessions, or is it the airport passengers, or is that all commercially sensitive that you can't? It'd be interesting to, I see Catherine kind of smiling there. I'd love to know how much. I mean, revenue is one thing, but it's the profitability. Like, your bottom line is X amount of profitability. Is it coming from car parking? Is it retail? Is it concession? Is it just passenger numbers? I know without passenger numbers you don't get anything, but is it you get the footfall of dragging them in at a relatively your €7, €8, €9, whatever it is, and then.
Chairman, I'd recommend some good reading there in terms of the recent decision. It does break out in a lot of detail, a lot of those elements.
That 250 pages, is it?
Some of which is commercially sensitive, obviously, in relation to our position vis-a-vis, a competition, but in broad terms, like at a Dublin airport level, the model is set up to say statutorily that we should generate a return that is sufficient to pay for our operating costs, invest for the future, pay a dividend to our sole shareholder, the state, and operate in that virtuous circle. We feel that the margins are way too tight within that to do all of those things in a consistent manner all at the same time. But we're not doing this for our own personal benefit or for the generation of profitability through the enterprise itself. It is as a state entity.
I suppose just to touch on the resilience, you're comfortable enough, Mr. Jacobs, that the resilience levels are building back up, not just in security, but in things, as you said, like toilets, like just rubbish bins being emptied, like all of the cleanliness factors. I accept the term one's quite an old building, but lots of old buildings do get refurbished, and I know lots of old buildings have been refurbished. Is the plan to refurbish T1, or is it to ultimately knock bits of it down and replace them?
The plan is to refurbish T1, and we want to have resilience on security, on the other operational staff and the other areas that you've called out, so toilets and everything else and general standards there. So I'm confident that we're working really, really hard and that we've made good progress, and that will continue all the way through to the summer. Our key focus, my priority number one, and management team's number one priority, is to make sure that we give customers the service that they expect and deserve this coming summer. So we will constantly be looking at everything from a toilet seat that's off, locks that are broken on the doors, every single thing that really can stop you having a good experience. So I'm confident that the resilience is absolutely our first priority. There will be bad days. There will be days when things don't go. There'll be bad afternoons. Then it's up to us as a management team to make sure that we recover and fix it. But we're absolutely on it. We're going in the right direction. We've made good progress, and we'll continue to.
I mean, I accept that T1 is a 50-year-old building. Initially, however, there's a lot of it has been, I remember a time when I was a child that the B gates, as they were known at the time, was the only thing open most of the time, and then the A gates were kind of resurrected. Maybe for a few weeks in the summer, and then obviously you have all that now, plus Pier D, which is a huge, but yet the front door, you're still coming in the same front doors, and you're still going through the same security footprint, I suppose, that was always there. And it's massively increased. What's the building capacity of T1, including Pier D or whatever it's now called? T2, what's its capacity? I accept there's a planning permission issue of 32 million, but what's the building capacity in terms of if the 32 million was lifted in the morning, could you operate 40 million? Could you operate 50 million? Or would you need to do a lot of additional capacity? And then just, I don't think anyone wanted maybe to touch on the third terminal aspect. Is there a point in time, or will there be a point in time in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years that a third terminal is needed? A brand new third terminal or not?
Look, in terms of the longer term capacity of the entire area, we would believe that there is master planning capability into 60 million passengers with a twin runway system fully operating, and clearly airports can be designed to grow in a variety of ways. I think people even in this committee have sometimes referred to what you're referring to Pier D. It's now called the 100 gates, but as a terminal, it's a pier.
I remember it being attacked when it was being built, unnecessary, along with T2 being unnecessary.
My expectation, although there are multiple options that can be considered over time, is that the eastern side of the airport, the existing airport, will still be the locus for arriving to and from the airport, and somewhat similar to, for example, Heathrow, where there are extended piers accessed either by road or by rail, or where you might board the aircraft. So if we're talking about extending the existing footprint, we've certainly gone through the process of identifying, while there are other options, there is sufficient capacity ultimately to develop out the airport to that scale.
But that would need additional terminals or add-ons to T1 and T2.
It needs additional passenger processing capacity and aircraft processing stands and the ability then to access the runways on either side.
You would see them as being kind of extensions and further extensions to T1 and T2 as opposed to a T3? Or a T3 beside T1 and T2?
I don't see, I don't believe, and we've studied this, that an independent, separately presented, independently standing terminal elsewhere, it will be the ultimate option, particularly when you have a single metro connection to the airport, where, for example, if you
I'm not necessarily saying a T3 on the far side of a runway. I'm not saying necessarily an independently owned or operated T3, kind of like a T5 in Heathrow, which is, or the T4 even, that was miles away from everybody else. I'm just saying, would you have a third terminal, or would you just do lots of add-ons to T1
I think you would extend the footprint.
T1 and T2, yeah. Okay. I think probably that's addressed quite a lot of the issues. And then just, I suppose, in terms of the bus connects, that you are pursuing both the taxis and the buses to have more 24-hour CIE buses, Dublin buses, and other operators, because obviously, but you don't have a problem with more people coming that way in the fact that it might damage your car park. That's not a reason
we're very proud of without the metro, the fact that our
3 and 4
our mobility and access has improved in terms of public transport usage over the last decade and beyond.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much for that. Deputy Merker, did you want to come very, very briefly? I'm talking 2-3 minutes if you wanted.
Yes.
Go on.
It's the brevity that's going to, create problems. Yeah.
It's hard to be good in 2 minutes as much as 20.
No, I'm not sure. Well, either which way. Look, I just want to go back to some of the stuff in relation to the de-icing and the issue there. And in fairness, I don't think I got it across clearly earlier what Aer Lingus had said. Look, I'll just throw out what they said rather than what I thought they said. In other airports, however, there is a de-icing area at the airport en route to the taxiway. That leads to a much more efficient de-icing process. In Dublin Airport, de-icing takes place on each stand. In that scenario, you have to move that ground equipment from one aircraft and stand to a different aircraft. That adds more time into the sequence. So, and as I said, they made, they spoke about particular issues, and they said there was an acceptance by DAA ground, teams on the ground, that things could have been done better. Everything seemed to improve from that point of view, but they did say there was an infrastructural difficulty, that wasn't the same in all airports. So,
I'll ask Vincent to cover the specific question that additional information on the infrastructure piece. So it's December 9. We could have done a few things a little bit better on that morning. By lunchtime on that day, we were happy that everything was in place and that no flight needed to be cancelled because of anything within our remit. So I think that's our view on December 9. But it was very cold that morning, and there are learnings for us, so we fully accept that. On the infrastructure point, Vincent, if you can handle that, please.
Yeah, the infrastructure that you described is not in place in Dublin Airport.
Would it need to be, should it?
There are mixed views on that, because you will get, many of our customers would say that is not a a beneficial provision because it creates a single point of failure that everybody has to access, and then if individual aircraft are out of sequence, everybody else has been held up in the queue. So traditionally, aircraft have been de-iced on stand individually, and that doesn't mean that anybody is effectively waiting for anybody else in a line. I would absolutely accept that different airports with different configurations have different infrastructure. I think we were a little bit surprised, and that might actually clarify that there couldn't have been any expectation that that sort of provision would have been made available on the day, and perhaps that's where some of the confusion about infrastructure not being available on the day.
In fairness, I don't think that's the claim they made. I think they said that this is something that is in existence and works in other airports. But as you say, there are contrary views to that. All right. Okay, that's an answer on that. Can I very quickly just ask? I have, but you know what I mean? I was able to look inside your heart. And I, in fairness, and apologies about earlier, my son was actually up on work experience. I'm not sure what work and I'm not sure what experience, so I wouldn't ask him. So therefore I had to take him to lunch. Yes, no, that's it. Well, that was another failing of mine, but there are many. Now, he mightn't thank me for this interlude, as they say. Look, do you deal much in relation to, because we're talking obviously about public transport, buses, etc., with the likes of Bus Éireann? I'm going to throw out a very local issue. It's the 100X from Dundalk. It's the fact, and in fairness, I've been over and back with Bus Éireann, and Bus Éireann have stated they can't maintain the timetable as exists at this point in time, and that they're going to obviously come up with a timetable that they can deliver upon, and that's meant to happen now in the very near future. So that's something we'll be chasing up. But one of the issues the constituent that came on to me also said was the fact that, like, the 100X wouldn't have a sufficient, the bus stop doesn't cut the mustard when the weather is bad. Now, there are particular issues in relation to queuing. I'd say that's Bus Éireann, but it's what interactions you would have with the likes of them, and also what would be necessary from a point of view of putting some sort of bus stop structure that, you know, is more fit for purpose.
Okay, I'll ask. I'm not familiar enough.
I wouldn't expect you to be. I would be utterly shocked if you were.
The 100X is from the airport to Dundalk, is it? Okay. I might have a chance of knowing about the Cork ones for himself.
No, look, and there have always been issues with it, and you know, they have not fit to deal with the timetable. But sometimes, what the constituent would have also said that it can take. One of the occasions he got on the bus at the airport, it took 15 minutes. Now, that's their queuing process, and whether it's the right bus or not, but it's what interactions you would have with the likes of them, and then, as I say, that particular issue as regards a bus stop that is not protecting people.
We'll look, they're part of the system, so we will have interaction with them. We can take a look at the bus stop and the bus stop in the rain in the round. We can't make any promise on that, but we can take that one away and look at it. Look, we would, as part of the system, we would want to be an effective product for the customers that use the service, as with all the services.
Oh no, I have no doubt, and I accept there's a certain level of unfairness in the question, but is that not the nature of these committees? When you're sitting, 3
hours later, they thought they were nearly out the door. Thank you all. To wish you the very best of luck in your new role, Mr. Jacobs, and in dealing with your largest customer, your former employer, who I'm sure you'll know particularly well, and to thank again Ms. Cummins and Mr. Harrison for your contribution. It's clear that you have all a great in-depth knowledge of your brief, and to thank you for being here this afternoon, and to wish you all the best in the future, and look forward to travelling through the airport in the not too distant future. So to thank you all for that, and I'm sure we'll see you again, and we will take on board your comment, particularly related to the regulator, and we may address that either with them directly or with the Minister in due course as we deal with our work programme in the next few months. So thank you all for being here, and this committee is now adjourned until next Tuesday at 4 p.m. for a private meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Deputies.
Thank you.